Good afternoon, Salt Lake City. Today is October 17th, and we are currently starting our council work session meeting. Our meetings are public, and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the council's agenda page on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or on SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there is no public comment, but join us tonight during our 7 p.m. formal meeting where you may share your comments with us. And of course, we always welcome your feedback by mail at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476, by email at council.comments@slcgov.com, or on our 24-hour phone comment line, 801-535-7654. Written comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted to our website, slccouncil.com. And the first item on our work session agenda is updates from the administration. We have Katie Reiser, Special Projects Volunteer Program Manager, and Andrew Johnston, Director of Homeless Policy and Outreach, here to give us updates. Hello.
Always come in so smoothly. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us. Just a reminder, first slide. There we go. Thank you. First slide, just a reminder, this is our webpage where residents can go to engage and give feedback with the city. Next. We've got a number of quick planning updates today. First, heading to the Planning Commission for a hearing are the Ballpark Station area zoning map amendments on October 25th. This updates the zoning regulations to implement the Ballpark Station area plan. For November 8th meeting, we have both the adaptive reuse ordinance, which should promote the reuse of existing buildings and discourage demolition, and the community benefits requirement, which is a part of thriving in place and would require a community benefit for all plan or zoning amendments. Then coming up on the 29th, there's tentatively going to be a hearing on the gas stations near water bodies to ensure environmental regulations are consistent.
Will you speak a little closer to the microphone? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Briefings are scheduled for a couple of other changes. These will take place for the Historic Landmark Commission on November 2nd and the Planning Commission on November 8th. These are historic overlay enforcement petition, which will enhance the ability to enforce Historic Landmark Commission regulations where buildings are demolished without permits or approval. The other is the demolition and historic district regulations, which will address historic buildings being demolished without going through a public process. Finally, for planning, we have 2 updates coming to council through the transmittal process. Those are the subdivision code update and daycare amendments. The subdivision code update brings subdivision code into alignment with state code. The daycare amendments remove barriers for locating daycares in the city and align city regulations with state code. Next slide. From the RDA, we have a Ballpark Next update. There are 2 Ballpark Next community visioning events coming up. First is this Wednesday, tomorrow, October 18th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Urban Indian Center. And the second is Wednesday, November 15th. This location is still to be determined. Residents and area stakeholders are invited to attend and participate in exercises that will help refine already gathered feedback to begin shaping the Ballpark Next guiding principles. Next, transportation and sustainability are teaming up to host a meeting with community leaders. They'll discuss the transition to electrified transportation and will seek input on barriers to adoption of electrified transportation in underserved and or low-income populations. And this meeting will take place on October 26th. Lastly, for transportation, after continued feedback, engagement, and design testing, 3 speed humps on the lower segment of East Capitol Boulevard will be rebuilt at a reduced height and will include wheel cutouts designed specifically for fire trucks. More up-to-date information is available on the project website. Next slide. I'm sure you all don't see me and not expect seeing a Love Your Block update. We're in our final stretch of our Bloomberg-funded pilot program as the grant award expires this month. Over the last 2 years, there have been countless accomplishments. from increasing safety, improving parks, beautifying and activating alleyways, and gathering together to both work and to celebrate. More than 3,600 community volunteers have worked across 40 different project sites to bring about this change. Beyond volunteerism, businesses, individuals, organizations got involved by contributing over $50,000 in discounts and donations to further the impacts of the mini grants that were awarded through this program. And as we transition to a new phase of the program, we're currently in the process of hiring 2 full-time neighborhood specialists. Once we bring these folks on board, we'll prepare for 2024 and expansion into new neighborhoods. Next slide. There are 2 remaining community office hours for the community outreach team in the mayor's office this month. Honeysuckle Coffee on the 25th from 10 to 12 p.m. and one at the Glendale Mountain View Community Learning Center on October 27th from 3 to 5. And lastly, I want to share a quick update on the ACE Fund. We'll begin accepting applications for the 2024 ACE Fund beginning November 1st. This application will remain open from the 1st of November through December 1st, and there will be 4 information sessions held throughout the application window. October 25th at the Salt Lake City Public Library, November 2nd at the Swordson Community Center, November 15th at the Glendale Mountain View Community Learning Center. This session I want to note will be held in Spanish with English interpretation available. And lastly, November 27th at the shop. For full details about the fund, info sessions, and how to apply, residents can visit our website, slc.gov/mayor/ACE-fund. And last slide. We also want to remind the public about an opportunity to engage on the I-15 environmental impact statement. There have been 3 community meetings scheduled. One is coming up this evening, actually, and another one tomorrow. This is an official time for the community to offer feedback and ask questions to the UDOT team. More information can be found at the UDOT webpage. And I will turn the time over to Andrew.
Thank you. This week we had the annual Utah Homelessness Conference held in Salt Lake City, so a lot of staff from multiple agencies were there, which also means there's a little delay in our data collection this week and reporting out. So you can see we have lots of people in the HRCs last week. I would anticipate it's probably running still the 99% as usual. And encampment impact mitigation work will be on 17th South this week. There's a lot of camping and also vehicles down that area between Redwood Road and the river primarily. And then there was a resource fair last Friday at Pioneer Park. You can see some of the participants there and what they did. A lot of people are very interested in the Rough Haven, obviously, and their pet support. Rescue Mission, My Hometown did the food. Councilmember Valdemoros and D4, Clothing Drive and Pastries, and then also the mayor's office and outreach teams fielded a lot of questions from the community at that event, so thank you to them, as well as Salt Lake County and the Rescue Mission. Kayak Court will be this Friday on the northern end of the river, probably North Temple going north to 10th North. Constitution Park is a good place for folks to go between 9:30 and 12:30 to resolve justice court or other court issues they've got. So recommend that to everyone. Likely this will be the last kayak court for this calendar year, as the wintertime makes it prohibitive to do it there. Then we'll pick that up again in the summer, probably springtime, my guess is. Next slide, please. The winter shelter services programs have opened up now, and they'll be doing so sequentially starting last night, really. So as of last night, St. Vincent de Paul Overflow started opening up at 7 p.m. It's open up only nights, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. They have 65 bed capacity there. Each of the other 3 single adult resource centers, the Gail Miller, Geraldine E. King, and Pamela Atkinson in South Salt Lake, are also opening up additional beds every night. They're going to try and do about 5 per night, but they're going to take in who they can take in every day until they get up to their winter capacity of 250 and 375 beds each. We'll also see the West Valley Emergency Shelter will open up probably close to November 1st, we're thinking, and it'll be 170 beds for their base capacity every night, and that'll be 24/7, so they can stay there with all the resources on site. Additionally, the Youth Resource Center will begin expanding their capacity probably in November once they get a temporary land use resolution potentially in front of you all, if that's something that you're interested in. They would like to increase to 50 beds each night. They do right now have the demand for that level, and so they are looking forward to that for the wintertime. And I think we've talked before about their intention to try and increase their capacity longer term, seeing an increase in need there. And then the Family Resource Center in Midvale still is running at capacity, but they're also able to flex some more options for families. So we encourage folks to use the 990 number or 9999 to contact them for family needs as well, and they can assist folks. Again, that number 990-9999 is the best way to get access to the system and ask for availability and where to go. But we'd encourage folks in this wintertime with the additional capacity to go to the resource centers themselves, and they will do intakes on site and bring you in. Again, the Gail Miller at 14 South and 3rd West is co-ed, men and women available there in couples. The Geraldine E. King is women only on 7th South, just off of State Street. And then the Pamela Atkinson Resource Center in South Salt Lake is single men. Any questions, council members?
I don't see any.
All right.
All right, thank you. Our next item on our agenda is item number 2, North Point Small Area Plan Follow-Up. Nick Tarbett from council staff is going to introduce this item, and then I see Chrissy Gilmore and Nick Norris here as well.
All right. Thanks for having us today. This is a follow-up briefing on the North Point Small Area Plan. The council's been discussing this since about March of this year. The last briefing was held on September 5th, and that same evening during the general comment section of the formal meeting, quite a few people spoke about the North Point Small Area Plan, many recommending changes to it. Most of the changes that have been requested would call for a greater portion of the area in the small area plan east of 2200 West to the north of about the city boundaries to be used as to be called for a greater conservation or preservation area. They've also requested the city put together some transfer development right tools that would allow the property owners who are in that area to be able to recapture their development rights but transfer them somewhere else. Tonight, or I guess today, as the staff report outlines, we have some proposed steps forward that are based off of the public input that Councilmember Petro has received from the community as well. So I think we just have a few outstanding items we'd like to go over the council with, and then if you can give us the direction on how you'd like to move forward, we can make any changes you would like to it and then bring it back for a consideration at a future hearing. The proposed way to move forward, and Councilmember Petro, feel free to correct me when I misspeak, obviously. It is to keep the future land use map that is in the current draft pretty much intact as is. That would not change at all. That would not change to allow more conservation or preservation in those areas. Then the council would initiate a text amendment or a zoning change of some sort that planning could decide what is best to create a new zone or zoning district or overlay for this area that would help bring to life the vision and the goals and the policies of the North Point Small Area Plan. Once that zone is in place, and until that zone is in place, anyone who's interested in annexing into the city in this area, the recommendation is they would come in as agriculture. And then once that zone is in place, they could then petition for that zone. Additionally, if anybody is interested in doing development between now and when that zone is in place, there would be considerations to do a development agreement that would help make sure the vision and goals of the North Point Small Area Plan are brought forth on that plan. Let me check my notes here, sorry. There would be we would change some of the text in the North Point Small Area Plan to make sure that it's very clear that that's what would happen between now and when that zone is in place. So that's the recommendation.
Just so I'm clear on the wording right there. So keeping the future land use map as currently proposed in the North Point plan would keep the land east of 2200 West zoned agriculture. And then the future would be, we are developing a new zoning overlay, or new zoning district, new zoning amendment to replace that. That would be still in draft. That still would have to go through the normal public process, through the planning commission, the public process, and back to the council for approval to whether we approve it or change it or disapprove it. But as of now, that land would be agriculture, and that's the land to the west of 2200, east of 2200, and then the land west of 2900 all the way out to 3200 West, that is private property, and that they have their own property rights as of now.
Yeah, most of that property that is owned by Skinnell, that is west of 2200 West out to 3200 West,
Yes.
is private property and already permitted to do with the BP, what's allowed under the BP zoning district.
And that area is there's other discussions going on about that portion of the property, the 29 to 32.
There's just not much for us to do through a small area plan. What is being done out there is reactive to the plans that have already been submitted secondary to what they're entitled to do. So I know that as a city, we want to be a party to it and supportive of it. We do not have the firepower, either legally, financially, or otherwise, to be the source of the solution. But I do know a nice coalition is building. And we have enshrined the unimproved aspects of 3200 West to further deter the use out there. We have not regulated the road for a variety of reasons.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that clarification. Thank you.
Council members, Councilmember Warden.
So while the zoning changes pending, the property owners would annex in as agricultural. Okay, and then during this time, there's also a possibility that the city or that property owners could explore doing additions to the shoreline trail or something similar to that, right?
The shoreline preservation area?
Preservation area, yeah.
Yeah, those efforts, those can totally go forward.
Right, and it would still be up to the property owner to participate in that, but what we were doing wouldn't prohibit that in any way.
No.
Okay, thank you.
This essentially buys us time as a city to explore those concepts without leaving the constituents out there subject to the lack of protections that have led to the debacle, which is happening with the development out there now. So this, to me, feels like the best of both worlds. It starts to offer us a path towards certainty on the most difficult acreage in the entire city. And it also offers us the chance to innovate on zoning. Thankful that Councilmember Mano is as brilliant as he is and introduce the concept of clustered development and all these other tools that we can use to both allow property owners to get what they need and also protect the natural assets. And I'm really thankful to all the constituents and residents out there who have, even under extremely stressful times, offered feedback and paths forward that this would honor.
Any other council members?
May I step through a few more items?
Yes.
One of the requests from some of the community members was to increase the buffer along the Jordan River north of 215. Right now, that's proposed to be at 100 feet, and they would like it to be 300 feet. That would be consistent with the Jordan River blueprint. There are concerns that could be considered a taking of private property if it's done without allowing any development in there. And there are ways that planning can bring some tools to the council to consider when you look at that new zone. Clustering is one of those options. If they don't develop within there, they could cluster their development in another spot or something like that. So if the council, that would be one change that has been requested by the public and the council could support to make in the future land use map.
Yeah, I think that's a great amendment to the plan to increase that buffer on the river. I appreciate that effort. If we can go, if we can move forward with that, that'd be nice to hear.
I guess this is probably an unnecessary question for me, but if you're okay with the council initiating the legislative action to start the new zone, we would have that ready when for the motion sheet when this is adopted, if this is adopted. Okay, thank you. And I guess we don't need to step through all these other ones. Oh, excuse me, annexation. This is a really easy topic that we can just get through. So if you recall, in April, a private property owner initiated an annexation petition to come into the city. And the city denied it at the time and said there will be a city-led annexation that will consider the area holistically. So is the council ready to start with that? There may be some benefit to not doing it entirely, as the recorder's office has done some initial outreach. They've learned that not all property owners want to annex in yet, and some are more likely to want to wait until that new zone is created so that they know what they would be coming into. They don't want to just come in as ag and then wait for that. So if you could direct us to move forward with that annexation petition as holistically, or you could instruct us to come up with some other options that would bring it in smaller pieces. One of which could be bringing in the city-owned properties. I think it's mainly airport-owned that are north of 2200 north, west of 2200 west. We could bite off some smaller pieces, or we could do the whole thing, whatever you would prefer.
Procedurally, what happens if we do the whole thing but certain property members protest?
So some of them, they can protest, they could remove themselves from being annexed into the city.
But the remainder of it can go forward?
Yeah.
And they're given adequate notice to be able to
Yeah.
submit that petition?
Mr. Chair, question on that. So if they can remove themselves from the annexation, if I remember right, doesn't state law prohibit islands? Is there any property owners that could reject them or remove themselves from this possible annexation and then create these islands of?
So the properties at this point that we know have been requested to be removed from the petition would not create an island.
Okay. On that note, then I'm a little more sympathetic to look at this holistically and go with the larger area, and that's what was the original intent a few months ago, and I still think about that now.
I completely defer on the timing of this. My only concern is I'd like to not have people annexed to other municipalities when we're going to end up supporting that area anyway. It makes sense that they're part of us, so my only sense of urgency would be to ameliorate the likelihood of people investigating other areas.
Councilmember Dugan?
One question on the annexing. If you were to annex the city-owned, say the airport area, is it beneficial to the airport to annex sooner? Does it really matter to them if we do it separately or together? Is there pros and cons on why you would do that separately?
There are pros and cons. The biggest pro is to get the completion of the new bypass road from 2200 West completed. That should be annexed into the city before we authorize that road, because we have to defer to the county for everything there, and we'd much rather be the entity that's approving those plans and inspecting and overseeing construction of what eventually will be a city road.
Right,
Would
there's
it,
not a-
would it add more work to your plate to separate them into two different documents, or?
Like two different annexations?
Yes.
To be perfectly honest, most of the annexation work actually goes on the recorder's office.
Okay.
So I don't think it impacts us that much, but it might impact them.
But it would be helpful for the airport to have it, that moves a little bit quicker through than the rest of the annexation.
Yes, because I know they have some work that they want to do on site to potentially lengthen runways, and that would require the shifting of that road and the creation of that new bypass road.
Okay, so I would be in favor of doing it just for the airport's sake on that portion of it.
So it sounds like we have different opinions on that. Why would we, if the property owners that don't want to annex in can remove themselves relatively easily, why would you be in favor of doing it in separate steps?
Oh, I'm just looking, separating the airport side of the house separately, just so that we can move quicker on that portion of it, because the airport is looking to work on that property now and then holistically do the rest of it together. Just the airport, basically separating the airport from the rest of the annexation. That was only just for the because of the airport's desire to move forward with their project and building that road.
I have no problem with whatever way we do this. I think, I defer to staff capacity. But, I mean, as long as we're moving forward on this, I'm happy.
Yeah, I think that we'd want to be able to keep as much flexibility as possible in how we proceed with that, just to make sure that something we aren't thinking of at the moment right now doesn't come up that may delay either or both of those.
So I think if the council just directs staff to move forward with it, we can, and then if something comes up that we need to, like Nick said, have some flexibility, then that would be okay.
I guess I'm just wondering, the one landowner there did initiate a petition, which we denied and said we were going to initiate our own petition. And now if we're not doing that, are we going back on what we promised to them?
Yeah, probably.
So I don't want to do that.
They may be one of the landowners, though, that does not want to annex into the city yet.
Okay.
So Cindy Lou,
It's our understanding that you're still pursuing the annexation without a petition. So it's still city-led annexation.
But I thought Councilmember Dugans was saying only the airport-owned piece.
Yeah, only the airport piece, so the airport can just move forward with their project without having to go through the county. They could do this while we go through the rest of it together. If the timeline's the same, then it doesn't really matter. Then you don't need to do that. But if there's going to be a delay in that portion of it, and the airport could be annexed immediately, then let them move that immediately and then go forward with the rest of it.
So the goal is not to, slow it down, but maybe speed it up for the airport side.
Yes,
So that's what you're trying to accomplish.
exactly. That's exactly all.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think I didn't understand that. Okay.
So, I guess I'm supportive of that general idea, as long as we don't slow down the process and make sure that we give direction as far as much flexibility as you need, also with as much communication towards us, since we know we represent the areas and we hear a lot from the community on this. So I'm okay moving forward as is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are we good on that item? Anything more from anyone there?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item number 3.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
The language on not item number 6, changes to the draft plan, those are all, we're good with those. It seems like there's no questions on the language, changing the language.
Yeah, those excuse me, planning staff, Chrissy made those changes already. Those are in the final, the
Okay. All right,
current
thanks.
proposed draft.
Okay. Let's move on to number 3. An ordinance for text amendments to our Historic Preservation Overlay District. Brian Fulmer from our staff and Amy Thompson from planning staff will be here. And Michaela.
Okay, we're also joined by Michaela Oktay. This is a proposal initiated by the administration to amend the city zoning ordinance related to the Historic Preservation Overlay District. If adopted, it would apply citywide to properties within a local historic district or landmark site. Proposed changes would make the ordinance easier for applicants, property owners, staff, and the Historic Landmark Commission. It would also create new processes for adopting and updating historic resource surveys. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Thank you. That was a great overview. If you can advance to the next slide, please. So again, this is a text amendment related to the overlay. What properties does the overlay apply to? It applies to properties within our local historic districts. Salt Lake City currently has 14 local historic districts. It applies to properties within a thematic designation. We currently don't have any of those. And then landmark sites, and the city has approximately 150. The Landmark Commission and the Planning Commission both voted unanimously to forward a recommendation of adoption of the text amendment to City Council. Next slide, please. Just a quick background of the city's preservation program. The city's first preservation ordinance was adopted in 1976, and the Landmark Commission is one of 4 land use authorities. One of the purposes of the historic preservation overlay is to protect and preserve historic areas of the city, and through processes and standards, manage alterations to those structures so that they retain their historic contributing status. The overlay does require approvals for exterior alterations, new construction, demolition, and relocation. It also includes process and standards for local historic district designations and reduction of boundaries and the revocation of a landmark site. Next slide, please. Before jumping into the text amendment details, I just want to go over some quick preservation terms that I'll be using throughout this preservation, talking about the text amendment. The first one is a certificate of appropriateness, also referred to as a COA. That basically just means historic approval. The next one is historic integrity. This is the ability of a property to convey its historic associations as defined by the National Park Service. There are 7 aspects or qualities that demonstrate historic integrity. Those are location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, filling, and association. And then a contributing building is a building that retains historic integrity. Some alterations may have occurred, although they are generally reversible. One exception to this is if alterations have occurred, but the building is significant because of its association, such as an important person lived there. And then non-contributing buildings are sites that do not retain historic integrity. Generally, alterations are irreversible. These can also be buildings that are less than 50 years old or out of the period of significance. Next slide, please. A large portion of this proposed text amendment is organization. We are proposing to reorganize Chapter 21A34, that's the Historic Preservation Overlay chapter, so that repetition is removed, process steps are clear, and timing of those steps is clear. We are moving the definitions from the overlay chapter into the definitions chapter. And then it moves the local historic designation process, which is essentially an amendment process, to a new chapter, which is 21A51, called Local Designations and Amendments. It's important to note that although we're moving this to this new chapter, the processing steps and the standards are not changing from what currently exists in the code. They're just moving location. Next slide, please. The following are the proposed changes and additions. I'm going to kind of breeze through these, and of course, if there's any follow-up questions, I'm happy to dive into them deeper. The first thing is adding an applicability section to the overlay, so it's clear what properties are subject to the overlay standards. We're also looking to exempt certain types of work from obtaining a certificate of appropriateness. These are generally very straightforward items such as maintenance, small plaques, mailboxes, utility meters, charging stations, and solar panels not visible from the public right-of-way. It also authorizes review and approval of all solar panels at a staff level. Currently, the Landmark Commission is required to review solar panels that are visible from the public right-of-way. It adds the ability to deny a certificate of appropriateness at a staff level when the standards aren't met. This is essentially a streamlining measure for the Landmark Commission's time. The bulk of applications that the Commission's seeing related to this are generally enforcement cases where the work has already been done. And rather than reverse the alterations, applicants are requesting to go to the Landmark Commission because the only option we can do is approve the project. We don't currently have the ability to deny at a staff level. We are also looking at adding some jurisdiction and authority language for the Landmark Commission to reflect duties that they are currently responsible for but that are not reflected in the ordinance. This includes things like reviewing National Register nominations and making recommendations to the Board of State History, as well as developing incentive programs to encourage the preservation of the city's historic resources and making those recommendations to City Council for consideration. It adds in requirements for a notice to demolish a non-contributing building within a district. This notice currently exists in our ordinance, but this adds in some specifics in terms of what types of information must be included in that notice, such as a map, photographs, the date when the decision will be issued, etc. And then lastly, application fees. We're also looking to add an application fee for a determination of economic hardship, as well as for reducing a local historic district boundary or for revocation of a landmark site. And then adding in 2 new definitions for historic integrity as well as period of significance. These terms are already referenced in the ordinance, but this just actually defines them. And then we are looking to add in some language that clarifies that the City Council adopts historic resource surveys as part of a local historic district designation. I'll talk a little bit more about historic resource surveys on the upcoming slides, but currently there's not a mechanism in the code to formally adopt those surveys. As part of the newer designations that have come forward to City Council, we have been having the council do that, but again, that process is not outlined in the zoning ordinance. And then the rest is really just fine-tuning language in terms of additions. The new processes that I'll spend a little bit more time with on the next upcoming slides are creating a new process for updating historic resource surveys, as well as creating a new process and considerations for historic status changes. Historic status changes is referring to a building contributing or non-contributing status. Next slide, please. So before talking about the updates to historic resource surveys, I just want to explain a little bit about what historic resource surveys are in case there are council members that are not familiar with them. There are generally 2 types of historic district surveys. The first is a RLS survey or a reconnaissance level survey. That is a broad brush look at a study area to look at what is potentially historic. This is generally done for large groups of buildings. Reconnaissance level surveys are not usually done for individual sites. And then the next is an intensive level survey. And those really do a deeper dive into the history, such as people that have lived there and changes that have happened to a building over time. All of these, or both of these types of surveys are done in accordance with the State Historic Preservation Office requirements, as well as the qualification requirements they have for who conducts those types of surveys. They provide for an understanding of what properties should be protected and how to incorporate goals into community planning efforts. It generally consists of a written report. There's an example here from Central City. All of these examples on the upcoming slides are from Central City in terms of what is included in that, as well as a map, photographs, and recommendations. Next slide, please. It also includes an inventory of all properties and their historic status rating. Again, that's contributing or non-contributing for each property in the local historic district. Next slide, please. And it also will include periods of significance for the district. So a district can have a number of periods of significance, or it could just have one. Again, this is an example from Central City, as well as some examples of properties that fall within each of those periods of significance. If a property is outside of a period of significance, it would be considered non-contributing. Next slide, please. So all of the city's local historic districts have an associated reconnaissance level survey as a best practice and consistent with the adopted community preservation plan. We recommend updating surveys approximately every 5 to 10 years. Current survey information is needed to capture changes within the district and allow for continuing evaluation and modification, if necessary, of boundaries and the lists of contributing and non-contributing buildings over time. Accurate information on properties helps ensure that the time and resources of the preservation program are effectively directed at the appropriate locations. They should be updated periodically to address new properties that may now be considered contributing due to their age. This is generally 50 years old. Age alone does not make a building eligible for eligible for contributing status, but it's important to acknowledge that resources that are perceived as historic and worth preserving may evolve and change over time. Updates to a historic survey could expand the period of significance, and therefore it's possible that some properties that were listed as out of period in a previous survey could be considered as contributing in an updated survey if they retained integrity and if an updated survey was adopted by City Council. Over time, maintenance can impact the status of a property. A property owner might defer maintenance, which could lead to a deteriorating condition and may render the property no longer contributing, or inappropriate alterations could also cause that to happen. Alternatively, a property owner could also reverse negative alterations, and then the structure could now qualify as a contributing building. There's two examples on here. I think a lot of times when we're talking about changes to historic status, people assume that we're changing buildings from contributing to non-contributing, and here's two great examples of buildings that were non-contributing and then changed to contributing status. In the proposed text amendments, updates to the historic surveys would be at a council level. There would be a public process leading up to that with public hearings with both the Landmark Commission and the Planning Commission. And then just a couple reminders that an update to a survey would not change the boundaries of a historic district. That can only be done through an amendment, but it could inform future proposed boundary changes. Any structures that would be changing status in an updated survey are to be clearly identified so that the council could see exactly what changes were being made. Next slide, please. And the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of new processes are historic status determinations. Historic status, again, referring to contributing and non-contributing status. The proposed process outlined in the ordinance is for individual properties in certain circumstances. The two circumstances that would be allowed for are properties that are unrated or properties that warrant reconsideration. There are a number of considerations that we would look at in terms of the considerations for a historic status determination, and that could be an updated survey. This would be an ILS survey, an intensive level survey. Again, that's a deeper dive than the reconnaissance level survey that would just visually look at the property. We would look at alterations and whether or not those alterations are reversible, a contextual understanding of the property, meaning whether or not the building contributes to the understanding of the overall district, and then finally historic integrity. And again, those are those 7 aspects of integrity as defined by the National Park Service. Next slide, please. Status determinations are something the zoning administrator is already authorized to do, as they're authorized to make interpretations of code standards. We are just proposing to put this specific type of determination process into the ordinance. I just want to go over 3 examples of historic status determinations that have been rendered in the city. This first example is a property that was, for whatever reason, unrated in the most recent survey. It was rated contributing in a previous survey. As staff, we look at the most updated survey to determine what standards apply to the property. It was inadvertently missed on the data sheets, the photo sheets, and the map. However, this property retains historic integrity and was determined to be contributing. Next slide, please. The last 2 examples are examples that have been brought up by the public and were discussed both at Planning Commission and Landmark Commission hearings. This property was changed from contributing to non-contributing. This is the former Big Daddy Pizza building. It was listed as a contributing building in the 2013 reconnaissance level survey. The property owner disputed the historic status of that and submitted an administrative determination along with an intensive level survey. The zoning administrator found that the property status should be changed because of alterations that were made to the structure. They included widening the front facade across the 700 East Street side, a side addition, vinyl replacement windows in primary portions of the north and south elevations, and removal of cladding. Next slide, please. Finally, this last example, a determination confirmed the non-contributing status of the property. No change was made in the determination. The property is identified as non-contributing in the most recent survey, but the survey prior to that, it was identified as contributing. Questions regarding the status were brought up to staff, and staff also questioned whether or not the status of the building was correct, and so a determination was initiated. Based on extensive research, the zoning administrator found the status should remain as non-contributing because alterations made to the structure, which included the application of stucco to facades, enclosure of the front porch, wrapped columns and glass, and replacement of the entry stairs. Many of these changes can be reversed. However, the stucco applied to the brick cannot be reversed. The property was specifically called out in terms of changing statuses when this went to a public hearing with the Landmark Commission, and information was available to the public in the form of the staff report that was provided at that time. And I just want to note, although the state is separate from the city in terms of our process for historic buildings, we do consult with experts from the State Preservation Office just to ensure that our determinations are in line with what their determinations are, so that we ensure that we're maintaining tax credit eligibility for these properties. Next slide, please. Finally, this last slide is some considerations for the council following a positive recommendation from the Landmark Commission and Planning Commission. Some technical changes were made regarding to updating language, citing correct ordinance sections for citations to reference the correct ordinance sections, and then there was some updates to language made to incorporate the recently adopted early engagement ordinance. And then following transmittal to the City Council adopted the Carriage House text amendment, which is within this chapter and these proposed changes. And so we have incorporated those changes within this chapter. And a copy of that ordinance was provided with the council's staff report with all of these changes reflected. And that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions that the council has, I'm happy to take those.
Council members?
I have a couple of questions.
Councilman Valdemoros.
So, so now that we can deny like a certificate of appropriateness at the staff level, what are the recourses for a property owner that says, I don't agree with staff, so I really think I done the right thing, and and I deserve the certificate of appropriateness. So what's the next level? Is that I can't remember where they could appeal that decision.
Yeah, so if this, if what we've proposed were to move forward with council adoption, they would appeal like any other decision to the appeals hearing officer. Yeah, so we would issue a denial and they would move forward with an appeal based on those same standards that we currently look at for, say, a minor alteration or a major alteration.
Okay. And so if we approve this, and it would be the same thing. Okay. And then the next thing is, in that property, the one that you had right before that looks pretty historic, but it is non-conforming because of they enclosed the porch. When we have those circumstances, I would like to keep that one, even though it's not non-conforming. So it would be nice to keep them. I mean, it's pretty nice in that corner. I think it adds to the neighborhood character. So, but right now, as is, it could be just demolished and gone. Are we thinking? Are we thinking about these non-contributing structures, like any other way to preserve them, or are we just giving up and like saying, well, it's not conforming? Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the one that actually are more, are conforming, and let's focus on that so that when they get repaired, then they stay as historic as possible. Or have you guys thought about that? What are we gonna do with those that are
In terms of the status of it, we would refer to that as a non-contributing status. And again, this is one that I brought because it has raised a lot of public comment and interest, I think. We definitely looked at if they were to reverse every single alteration that had been done, could this ever be considered contributing, even by the state, for the purpose of tax credits? And the answer was no, because there is no way to reverse the stucco, the applied stucco. So in terms of the standards that we look at, we still require approval for non-contributing buildings to do certain things, but certainly the standards are different than with a contributing building. And yes, someone could apply to demolish the building, and it has a different process, which is just an administrative process for demolition of a non-contributing building. Another thing to take into consideration is all of the changes that happened to that building. We wouldn't have approved any of those. Our standards and guidelines are, we don't allow enclosure of porches. We don't allow application of stucco to brick. And so if we then say that a property that has done all of these things is still contributing, that somewhat devalues the standards and guidelines of the district overlay.
So how hard would it be when they go through the demo process, right? Like somebody says, well, this is not contributing. I really want this on. I want to build something bigger. Would that be super easy for them to get that, that building demolished, like that approval? It would be like,
yes,
right.
So,
So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is we see that happening, especially in District 4 and in other places where perhaps, houses that are non-contributing because of some sort of modification made it non-contributing. We're losing a lot of those homes. And at some point, I would like to keep them, like start thinking about, hey, I know they're not contributing. Modification will be made here, but we're losing them, and we're losing the, the neighborhood character. So I'm not sure where in the process, in our process, we're going to start thinking about the ones that have been modified. This one has been modified, but not to the point that is unrecognizable that this was, a historic structure. I mean, it's a nice corner, it's a nice property, but I think that's one of my, wishes to you guys and to us to think about those slightly modified historic homes that are non-contributing, if we're going to put some protections for those before they're all gone. Thanks.
Councilmember Young.
So, in summary of a lot of these changes, it appears that aside from some technical cleanup, we're also trying to make less administrative burden related to maybe some of the applicants. Is that accurate or no?
I don't know about that. Can you Sorry, can you
So
elaborate
like
a
when I
little bit
see
more?
something around, the ability to be able to install storm windows, the
correct.
plaques, the mailboxes, like we're talking about very minor modifications that currently they would have to go through a process for, and we would be looking at removing that so that those types of modifications aren't necessarily a burden to homeowners. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Accurate.
Yes, that's accurate.
Great. I support removing some of those unnecessary barriers related to government so that they have that ability to make those changes.
Thanks, Councilmember Aaron. Councilmember Petro?
Love you guys. Big fan since way back. Support all the changes. Something else I'd like to see, and I don't know that this has the power to do that, and maybe it goes with others. When I was on Historic Landmark, I still have a hole in my heart over the place in Marmalade, formerly called Bishop Place. And there's a long history of people squatting on historic properties, allowing them to fall to such a state of disrepair that they would require an enormous financial investment to get them back to a place of contributing, and then claiming financial hardship. One person literally said that because his boat required so much work, there was financial hardship. Owning a historical landmark is not something just anyone could do. I'm not in a position to own a historic landmark. When you do own a historic landmark, you should view yourself more as a steward of it for the future instead of an owner who gets to indefinitely mark this spot as your own. That's my personal philosophy towards it, but it does seem like a little bit of a carve out from traditional real estate speculative practices. So I don't know if this ordinance has the power to do it, but I would like to see some sort of penalty, or Katie can correct me on whatever it is that we could actually do, for people who would allow historic properties to fall into such states of disrepair and then attempt to use the economic hardship loophole to get out of their preservation, thereby giving themselves prime real estate to redevelop, often in upcoming neighborhoods. So I think that from what I'm seeing, that feels outside the scope of this. But it is one of the problems that continues to haunt me from my days on HLC, and I would really love to see us give legs to enforcement around that.
Councilmember Dugan?
Almost on that same vein, talk a little bit on the demolition of the non-conforming, because it was a policy question about is this the current way it's written? Demolition requires outreach to the neighborhood or the neighbors if they're going to demolish it, or no?
For demolition of a non-contributing building, the process isn't changing. So we currently just require a notice. Actually, I think it might slightly be changing because it's a noticing requirement of 80 feet or something like that. And then it can be approved after that time at a staff level. So that aspect isn't changing. What's changing is what has to be included in the notice. So more information in the notice goes out to the people that would receive the notice, including a map, information about the property, and when a decision would be made.
Because I'm just going back to Councilmember Petro's discussion about, a house being ill repaired, going to non-conformance, then saying, "Oh, I'm going to demolish it," and not really having a notification of the neighborhood or the neighbors about that. And next thing you know, it's being gone, where in fact there might have been some upswell of, we're going to try to bring it back up to standards, and how we make that happen without just allowing the house being demolished without really having any notification of that. So I'm throwing that out there. I'm not sure how to you approach that, but is there a way to approach it so that a house that's been in disrepair could be brought back up if the neighbors knew about it without being demolished? And then the second question, part of the question is that, is this demolition written the same way as any other demolition of a house that's outside of a historic district area? Are they basically the same, written the same way?
The demolition of the non-contributing
Yes, yeah,
building?
non-contributing, sorry.
So that's like a building that's been changed so much that whoever lived there in 1930, if they came back, they would not recognize that house, like some of those fabulous
yeah.
photos. That, we send a notice out, Amy's changes are to include more information, 12 days, I think it's 12 days. 12 days, we're gonna make this decision. Now, if it's a contributing building, it's historic, and it goes through a super robust process where everyone with, if an application comes in, everyone within 300 feet will get a notice. It will go to landmarks. It has to go to landmarks. And willful neglect is addressed in that process. We'll talk to the attorney's office about fees and what we can do later with buildings that would get to willful neglect. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Dugan?
Councilmembers, other questions on this? I just have one question, and I think I can kind of guess what the answer is, but can you talk me through the justification for charging a fee to apply for financial hardship?
Yes.
Because if I actually have a financial hardship, do I get my fee waived, refunded?
I don't mean to correct you. It's an economic hardship. Okay, so you have your historic building on Bishop's Place, let's say. Well, not anymore because they're all gone. That's a long story. But a beautiful historic house, right? Someone wants to tear it down. They're going to go through that robust process, the demolition process. It's going to take a look at, is this still a historic building? What does the block face look like? If this historic building goes away, what's it going to do to the district? What's it going to do to the streetscape, et cetera, et cetera. But it's going to also talk about willful neglect. If they fail at getting that certificate of appropriateness at landmarks for demolition, they have an option to apply for economic hardship. Thank you. Economic hardship. And we don't have a fee for that right now. And it's basically, they want to make a claim, a financial claim, that there's no beneficial use of that property anymore. Essentially, the overlay's a taking. So the code requires us to essentially have a qualified financial expert on hand, and we do have a contract for one right now. It's $250 an hour. Just have one person right now. Hopefully, if this ever comes to light, we will not have a conflict situation. So back in 2019, we had a fee analysis done with finance, taking a look at all of our processes and saying what the real cost is versus what the fee the city actually charges is. And actually 50% of the cost is reflected in that proposal. So the actual cost to go through an economic hardship process after you've failed at landmarks, which means it's going to be a detriment and a loss to a historic building. You want to come in again, and it's usually developers, to be quite frank. They're going to come in with a binder and an attorney. We'll have our financial expert. So we can talk about that fee. It's $2,050 was the proposal. That's 50% of the actual price 2019, which is $41.01, plus $200 an hour up to $20,000. We could cap it. There was an option from our lovely attorney, Paul Nielsen, that perhaps if they won economic hardship, we could just refund the fee. Or keep it as it is.
I think I maybe don't understand this at all. Economic hardship, okay, so I want to demolish a building that currently is considered contributing. I have to go through this process to say, can I demolish this? And then I get told no, so I apply for economic hardship. If I have economic hardship, even though the building is contributing, you're going to say, okay, it's true, you can't afford to rehabilitate this building and it's going to cost you too much, so we're going to allow it because of economic hardship? I think I don't understand what that...
The person who's requesting economic hardship is saying there's no beneficial use to this property, and we have in the code like a laundry list of items that they can bring to prove that. Like, had they marketed it? Does it have a beneficial use anymore? Have you marketed it? did you just kick folks out like was the case in Bishop's Place where we lost 9 buildings? We'll ask for like 3 years of that. Any other financial information, perhaps some really,
So it's not necessarily that
physical
this
integrity, like I
landowner-
have to do X, Y, Z to it. It can be anything.
It's not necessarily that that landowner is having their own financial hardship, but the project has an economic hardship.
Right. It's not about the developer or property owner. It's about the property. And if it can be put to beneficial use, prove that it can't, essentially.
So,
Why wouldn't we just get rid of that process? That option? I mean, maybe it's required by code, I don't know. But would that be another option for
probably
us to
does.
just,
So
instead of charging
the-
this fee for this really
No, the-
complicated process,
It'll
just
go to
say,
court.
Yeah, the primary
Later?
reason why we have that option is to make sure that our historic preservation ordinance isn't creating a regulatory take. So
Yeah.
it's an option to make sure that we're avoiding that.
okay,
so
all right. I think I'm satisfied with those answers then, with
I
the
have-
fee.
So,
Voldemort?
scenario, I have a contributing structure. I cannot market it. I have to replace the roof, and now in order for me to replace the roof, I don't know, it's $60,000. I don't know, $100,000, and I really cannot afford it. Is that where we're gonna go through a process and then prove that?
No,
Economic.
it's not about your finances, and it's about if that property, whether it's physically deteriorated or you've been trying to lease it, sell it, you have to prove that there's no way that there's like a beneficial use to it.
Okay. So basically, if you say, well, it's a contributing structure, but the roof, it needs to be replaced, that's not good enough for the demolition. You have to figure out how to replace the roof.
Absolutely not, yeah.
Right,
We
because
would
we have
tell you,
NOAA money, we have naturally occurring affordable housing money for you to fix the roof and keep it affordable.
we'd help you with
Thanks.
tax credits. But no,
Okay.
that wouldn't qualify.
All right. What's the next steps for this, Brian?
There is a public hearing on November 7th. It's on tonight's consent agenda to set the date for that. And then, as of now, a potential vote on November 14th.
Okay, great. I think we're ready to move on to the next item, which is
Thank
number
you.
4. Thank you. Item number 4, which is an ordinance for an alley vacation at approximately 1518 South and 300 West. Brian Fulmer is going to introduce this again, and Michael McNamee from planning staff will walk us through this, and I believe the applicant is here as well.
Yes, and Chrissy Gilmore will also join us at the table.
Michael and Chrissy.
So this is a proposal to vacate 2 city-owned alleys near the address you mentioned. They are west of 300 West between Andrew and Van Buren Avenues in Council District 5. One alley runs north and south between Andrew Avenue, where it intersects with the other alley approximately 150 feet to the south. The other alley runs east and west, beginning at 300 West, and terminates approximately 300 feet to the west of that point. As you mentioned, the petitioner is here and would appreciate an opportunity to address the council, and I will now turn it over to Michael.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is a request to vacate 2 public alleys in the vicinity of 1518 South 300 West. Next slide, please. The request would fully vacate both alleys. One of the alleys travels north to south between Andrew Avenue and the other alley. This alley will be referred to as Alley A. The other alley travels east to west between 300 West and the east side property line of 352 West Van Buren Avenue. This alley will be referred to as Alley B. The Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation to the City Council for the vacation of both alleys with conditions. Next slide. The alleys are located west of 300 West between Andrew and Van Buren Avenues, or between 1515 South and 1550 South. They were dedicated to the city in 1890 as part of the Stewart's Addition subdivision. A large portion of Alley B has already been vacated, as shown on the slide. 400 West, which used to connect Andrew and Van Buren on the west side of the block, was vacated in 1973. The property surrounding the alleys is in the CG General Commercial Zone, and it is located in the Central Community General Plan area, as well as the Ballpark Small Area Plan. Alley A, the north-south alley, is 16.5 feet wide by 148 feet 7 inches long, and the remainder of Alley B, the east-west alley, is 16.5 feet wide by 298 feet 8 inches long. Next slide. Alley A appears to be paved, but a gate was installed likely at some point after 2019, which blocks public access. The alley is primarily used as parking area for an adjacent auto repair business. Alley B is gravel and has unobstructed access between 300 West and where it intersects with Alley A. To the west of Alley A, it has also been fenced off and appears to be used as outdoor storage and parking. The gravel also appears to be deteriorating beyond this point. The gate appears to have been added at some point between 2019 and 2021, according to satellite images. Next slide. Andrew and Van Buren Avenues are both very narrow streets at approximately 33 feet wide. Currently, only a small portion of Andrew has a sidewalk, while Van Buren does not have one at all. But because 400 West was vacated, Van Buren is a dead-end street, resulting in a low level of connectivity. Most of the surrounding development is heavy commercial or auto-oriented. However, a new multifamily building is being constructed on the other side of Andrew at the corner with 300 West. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the property surrounding the alleys, which will be discussed on a later slide. Next slide. Alley A and the portion of Alley B proposed to be closed in this application were the subject of a quiet title lawsuit in 2022. A court issued a judgment granting title to the applicant, but as the city was not named or served with the lawsuit, the judgment is not binding on the city. Nevertheless, once this judgment was recorded with Salt Lake County, the alleys were mistakenly identified by the county as belonging to the applicant. To clarify that the alleys remain city property unless and until the city council grants this alley vacation application, and to create a mechanism for the alleys to be conveyed to the city in the event this application is denied in whole or in part, there is a signed notice of public alleys that was included as attachment D of the staff report. And that notice is being held in escrow by the city attorney's office pending a decision on the application by the city council. Next slide. The applicant owns all of the property surrounding the two alleys, and they are proposing to redevelop the site. They currently have design review and plan development applications with the planning division for review. As proposed, the development would cover the entirety of the site. And in order to accomplish this, the alley vacation is necessary. The site plan shown on the slide is preliminary, and the applicant has not yet received final approval for these plans. I do want to note that this site plan does incorporate a potential mid-block connection, and this was done after the Planning Commission hearing to incorporate the Planning Commission's recommendation. Next slide. In reviewing the application, staff used the standards in Chapter 1452 of the City Ordinance. These list policy considerations for vacation of alleys, as well as standards to consider when making a recommendation to the Planning Commission. Next slide. To dive into more depth about the request, next slide. First, the applicants are asking to fully vacate Alley A, the north-south alley. Alley A currently helps to break up the block, which is very long at about 759 feet from 300 to 400 West. However, it does not provide a connection between Andrew and Van Buren Avenues. Staff feels that a better treatment for this block could be to vacate Alley A and replace it with a mid-block connection that fully connects Andrew and Van Buren. This could also provide for a placement of the connection that breaks up the block in a more even way than Alley A does, helping to make Van Buren feel more connected to the surrounding streets despite being a dead end. If it were replaced with a full mid-block connection, vacating Alley A would meet policy consideration from 1452 020 Urban Design. The Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation to the City Council with the two conditions shown on the screen. Next slide. The applicants are also requesting to fully vacate
Michael,
alley.
could you go back to and walk us through the two conditions?
Sure. So the first condition is that the property owner enters into a development agreement with the city that requires the creation of a mid-block connection. And they also, the Planning Commission wanted there to be enough space on both sides of the alley for there to be frontage for 2 buildings to help break up the site because it's quite large. And then we would also require a public access easement, ensuring public access to that private right-of-way. And then the second condition is that the applicant shall not purport to convey the property encompassing any portion of the alleys until at least 60 days after a final decision by the city council on the petition.
Will you translate that for me?
And I can jump in a bit on that second one. This has to do with that that quit claim or quiet claim, that just working through those legal issues with the attorney's office. They recommended this until those are worked out. But if you need further clarification, I can have a representative from the attorney's office come up.
If I'm understanding it correctly, there was a previous legal action to take quiet title, which just sort of means you say, I've been managing this property for X number of years, it's mine. And so it sounds like the 60 days is a mechanism to help make sure that that goes away and that the city vacation process is what happens.
It goes through. Okay, that makes sense. That's a lot of
That's
words.
sort of my guess, I think.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I support this this connection. It's very hard to move around in that area. You always have to go into 300 West, and it would make sense to me to require that, to keep that that condition.
So, Councilmember Pui, would you, I believe the Planning Commission recommended a walkway. Does that satisfy what you're interested in, or are you hoping for a vehicular connection as well?
It seems to me that, it doesn't talk about vehicles on the original recommendation, does it?
I believe the Planning Commission recommended just a walkway.
Just a walkway.
But I also am hearing what you're saying about to get from one street to the other there, you always have to go to 300 West, which is not as bad as it has been for the last couple of years, but is still a large street and hard to
The issue
go
in that
in and out
area
of.
is that you have 400 West and it doesn't connect all the way. It's weird that one block doesn't connect, and the other ones you can go around the block like a normal neighborhood. But there is some weird rail line, abandoned, who knows who. It's a weird area of town, and it's all cut out. So I know that will signify quite a bit of a change in size, but I will be supportive of if there is that support here to push the envelope a little bit on vehicular access.
Okay. All right. Sorry, are we done? You still have more slides.
Yes.
Okay, back to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So the applicants are also requesting to fully vacate Alley B, the east-west alley. Alley B used to be much longer, connecting to 400 West on the west side of the block. However, most of Alley B has already been vacated, starting in 1973 and then again in 1997. It is no longer serving its original purpose and is not providing much additional connectivity to the block. To the west of Alley A, the alley is fenced off and used for outdoor storage and parking. This portion of the alley meets policy consideration A, lack of use. The entirety of Alley B breaks up the block in an uneven way, creating a rectangular site on its south side that is nearly 300 feet long on the Van Buren side, while only being 56 feet wide on the 300 West side. Vacating the alley would lead to a better use of the block overall, which meets policy consideration C, urban design. And the Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation to the City Council for the vacation of this alley as well, with just one condition, which is that that same condition about not conveying the property until at least 60 days after a final decision was made. Next slide. Vacating the alleys and replacing Alley A with a new mid-block connection generally complies with the applicable adopted plans. The Central Community Plan does not list preserving alleys as a priority in this area, but it does recommend that easements for mid-block connections be obtained where possible. The ballpark plan lists a goal of utilizing existing alleys for pedestrian and bicycle connections. However, the existing alley configuration does not provide good connectivity, so replacing them with something that does would better meet that goal. Plan Salt Lake echoes the Central Community Plan, recommending increasing connectivity through mid-block connections. Next slide. As part of this application, a public engagement process was conducted. Staff sent mailed notice of the application to property owners and tenants within 300 feet, and an online open house page was posted. Notification was also sent to the Ballpark Community Council, and no comments have been received on the proposal at this time. Next slide. As previously mentioned, the Planning Commission has forwarded a positive recommendation with the following conditions. Next slide. And I had been planning on covering the conditions in depth here, but we've already discussed them, so that's okay. But that concludes my presentation, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Councilmember Dugan?
Just for my clarification, basically, we're getting rid of Alley A, but we're going to have a mid-block, which is the new alley. In essence, it'd be an alleyway from Van Buren down to, or Andrews down to
The
Van
difference would be that the alley is open to vehicular traffic and a mid-block would not be, unless we go with what Councilmember Pui said and request that it become a vehicular access point.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. So the alleyway would be considered vehicle traffic, mid-block would be just walk, pedestrian traffic only.
Yeah, and I think
that would also be on their property, so they would have to maintain that.
They would maintain it, and there would be a public access easement, meaning the public has the right to walk across that part of the private property, but it would not be owned by the city.
Right.
If I understand that correctly.
Yeah, and if it helps to clarify, our new mid-block walkway standards have 15-foot requirement for the mid-block walkway with 6 feet of unobstructed pathway.
Okay, thank you.
Will you repeat that again? So 6 feet of unobstructed walkway, so it's sidewalk.
Unobstructed pathway to the sidewalk, and then they can have landscaping and other things in the remaining width.
Yeah. I mean, that block is complicated for me because it's you're sort of trapped, and this is what I mean, I don't feel very strongly about it, but you sort of feel trapped in that part of town, especially because all the other streets do have connection in the back with 400 West, except for that one and the other ones down south.
I mean, you're not wrong. It is a hard part of west of 300 West is hard to get through. I think so. If I'm looking at this and thinking through, I first of all, I appreciate the applicant, and we'll give you some time in a second to speak, but I appreciate the applicant for giving. I had a small group meeting with them and was able to walk through this and kind of prepare for today. I appreciate this. I understand how vacating those alleys and adding the mid-block crossing makes an easier development. I've said this before in public meetings. I don't like vacating alleyways. I think we have large blocks in our city already, and alleys serve to break up those large blocks and encourage smaller buildings. And to the extent that a larger building, in this case, I can see how it creates better development opportunities, but I don't necessarily think large buildings are better for the community. I think smaller, more human-scaled buildings are preferable when possible. And vacating an alleyway is something that is entirely at our discretion, if I'm understanding the laws correctly. So I think for me, first off, what the Planning Commission recommended in having the mid-block crossway is absolutely essential for me to be okay with this. I would be okay with what Councilmember Pui suggested and having it be a vehicular crossing, but I think that what we're doing is we're saying instead of small buildings, we're allowing them to build one larger building, which I think what I want in the other additional thing that I would ask, and I asked them this when I met before, is street activation. Because what I really don't like, and I know that they're in general commercial zone, which is not a zone, tell me if I'm saying anything wrong, but they're in general commercial zone, which does not have any design standards and is not a very good zone for street engagement. I would like also some language in there about street activation And I think on 300 West, I would prefer that at least a good portion of that be commercial street activation. And I'd be okay with Andrew Avenue, Van Buren, and the public walkway / street / alley, whatever we're calling it, running between the two being residential activation. But what I don't want to see is parking garages along. Obviously, you have to get in the parking garages. Some percentage of the streets will have to be, will be blank because of that. But what I don't want is a big portion of those street-facing areas to be blank and not activated. I know the site plan is showing that right now, but I also understand how development plans change. And so I want, for me, that's what I'm hoping to get in a development agreement is those things in order to be comfortable saying, okay, we'll let you build a larger building here. That otherwise, I think that street activation, street-facing units in commercial space will compensate for larger, not human-scaled buildings. Any other comments from council members before we ask the applicant to come present and respond to that?
Just quickly, I was going to say no, and then I turn on my microphone. So I agree. 300 West is, we have invested a lot of money on 300 West to make this an environment that activates the sidewalk. So now we need the development side of it to match this. So that to me is key to 300 West and what we envision it to be all along. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think then let's invite the applicant up. Our policies, they have 5 minutes. I know we also asked you some specific questions, so do whatever you were planning on doing, and if you didn't answer our questions, we'll ask them again.
Okay, so sorry, I'm Jared Hall. I'm the architect.
Oh, thank you. Riley Rogers, the owner.
So we've got just a couple of slides, most of which Michael already kind of presented to you. This is a larger view of the street network in the area. As you can see, uniquely in this area, kind of the east-west connection, there is a lot of, but the north-south on our exact site does not have as much. Next slide. So that red area is the property that we are looking at, and then the next slide is as Michael showed, the existing alleyway network. As you can see, there's not north-south connectivity provided by the existing alleyway, and they don't really help kind of shorten that. Next slide. So this is our photos of the existing alley connections. As you can see, they're not in great shape. Next slide. And then this is the current condition of the north-south alley. Next slide. So this is based on our kind of proposed plan. This is where we are proposing the north-south pedestrian connection. We feel relatively strongly that based on the city's goals of increasing sort of pedestrian access to things, that this being a pedestrian only meets the mid-block walkway goals better than if it was a vehicle access. But this, and one of the Planning Commission's recommendations was that we were spaced for a building on each side, which this location would provide, and it moves it roughly to the center of the existing block. Next slide. So this shows how the plan Michael was showing sort of fits into that with the existing alley location and how it has a building on each side. Next slide. And then based on our conversations with Councilmember Mono, we kind of looked over the plan, and on our 300 West facade, we have roughly 64% of it that would be public amenity, for lack of a better word, in restaurant, retail type uses. And then we have 85% of our street and access that would have some sort of activation, be it residential units, amenity space, stuff like that. So we're trying to activate as much of it as possible. The required width for the mid-block walkway is 15 feet. We are showing a 21-foot, so we're a little larger than that. Next slide. And we have just a couple of images of what we're kind of hoping this looks like as we work through the final design, through the design review process with the Planning Commission. Kind of a very pedestrian-friendly, walkable, park-like atmosphere. Next slide. And then just a view looking the other way. And that is our presentation. We could answer any questions.
Councilmember Wharton?
So why is this configuration better than just reconfiguring it with the existing alleyways?
Could you go back to the slide that shows the existing alleyways? So as you can see here, like the corner property is very small and nearly impossible to get parking on with any street activation. And so that corner parcel, given the parking requirements in the CG zone, would be a very, very small building with not many units. And then also along that south side of the east-west alley is a similar problem. Like, it's just not deep enough to have parking and any sort of street activation. So it would probably...
And even if you do take it all the way to the south, it just doesn't make it very feasible for parking to get enough on there for developing that site. It's just a small location
And
to the east of that.
Okay. And what activation are you looking at on Third West?
So we're looking at a fair amount of retail and a restaurant space. We haven't got tenants for that yet. But we can go back to the building site plan.
Yeah, right there.
So that pink stuff in the upper right would all be retail spaces, and then the yellow kind of in the middle would be restaurant space. The gray and blue is the apartment entryway off of 300 West, and then the apartment gym on the south corner.
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding the map then. Like, where is the gray block in between the yellow and the powder blue, I guess? That's not an entry point. That's
No, that's the apartment tenant's entry point.
Oh, I see.
And so it'd be all of that yellow and all of the pink on the top. That would
Everything to the north of that is retail and restaurant.
Right. Okay, but the alleyway is that like powder blue?
No,
the alleyway is
the existing alleyway is not shown. Our public access is the thing that's going.
My apologies. We thought
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as proposed, it's not an alleyway, it's a mid-block walkway.
Right.
I guess my question is, so 64% of 300 West facade is commercial. I think the condition I'd want added is 100% of it is activated, meaning no parking on 300 West. It can be, I think, having whatever that ends up with 36% as tenant spaces is I would be okay with. Is it 85% ground floor activations? That mean Andrew and Van Buren Avenues?
And the public access.
And the public access. Okay. I think I would want to just clarify that between Andrew, Van Buren, and the public access, that we would have that percentage of activated space. I guess I could go either way with asking it to be an actual alleyway or not. I don't know that that's critical to me, but I can but I have also had the experience of like not being able to get through in that area and wanting to avoid traffic on 300
Our
West.
intention was try to make it as pedestrian and bike friendly as possible. And I know it doesn't matter right now. The people to the west are planning to develop that side as well. Not that you can control when that's happening, but there most likely would be a road somewhere else in there.
Mr. Chair, I will, this is how I see it. And I'm also in that place where I think this is a significant improvement to what it is right now. I appreciate the work and the thought into this. And we have a freeway right there. And we have a rail line, an old rail line that screwed up all the connection because they sold it to individuals. And who knows when that happened. Individual, people, and they all own a little piece of this old rail line that cut the neighborhood in half. Then they added the freeway in it. So you have this gigantic screw up of connectivity in there. And I think we have an opportunity to fix some of that. I know that sort of affects your, your design and your bottom line in some ways, but I think that this is a moving forward steps where you are gaining you are consolidating all these lots now because of this alley vacation. I will say that an alleyway, so there is vehicular access, will solve some of the connectivity issues in the area, and we're adding potentially this is not an absence of all the other changes that are going to come on our way in this neighborhood. There's probably going to be hundreds of these similar applications in the next couple of years. And we're going to have a nightmare on 300 West. Every time that someone tells me about opening an opportunity to remove a barrier on connectivity, I'll take it. And I appreciate the walkway and the bicycle friendliness, and the signs seem wonderful, I'm not going to lie. But I will say to push a little bit more on that and to solve the connectivity and vehicular connectivity in that area.
Okay. Councilmember Petro?
Is this the first time I'm going to be the least car-centric person? I actually really love it like this, and I think I would rather see something like signage, like until another one comes through, like not a through street or something that would indicate that you shouldn't drive down there. But I think I love the idea that you're on busy 300, but these residents would get away from that and have something a little quieter and something a little more intimate in a place that's historically been, kind of industrial. And, I mean, we've all gotten stuck on the street because 300 has been a nightmare for so long. We've all tried to get around it and realized this is not the way to do it. But I would rather see signage or something that deters people from going down there and allow these residents to have kind of that experience that seems kind of nice in an unlikely place.
Okay, so we might be in little slightly different places on whether we want vehicular access to that or not. I think, well, any other questions pertaining to this application? I have a couple questions that aren't my decision on the alley vacation, is not dependent on these. This is CG zone. Are you planning to pursue a rezone to develop this, or is this all designed within the CG zone requirements?
So it's designed within the CG zone, which does allow an increase in height if you go through design review, and that is
okay.
But no zone change.
No zone change, but the increase in height in the design review. What about parking? Would you... I'm asking this because of the more general implications to the area. As the developer, do you feel like the CG zone parking requirements are adequate, too high, too low?
I think everybody has a different opinion on that, but
I understand that. Would you, if CG zone didn't have parking requirements, would you be providing the same amount of parking?
we would actually, yes, we would like at least 1-1 ratio, if not more. It just feels a little bit more comfortable in there, but
I thought CG zone was more than 1-to-1.
It's like 1.25 to 1, but through the shared parking arrangement, you can go under that a little bit.
I see.
And we're just.
I'm genuinely asking because I don't actually, because I'm interested in what the appropriate parking requirement for the 300 West corridor is, and wondering if we're currently asking for too much or if it's about right. Chrissy?
I have that pulled up. So the CG requirement is for 2+ bedrooms, it's 1.25 spaces, and then 1 space for studio or 1 bedroom.
Okay. So 1 space for
It's just not
studio and 1 bedrooms, and 1.25 spaces for 2+ bedrooms. And you're proposing to provide that, and that's about
Yes,
right
correct,
for your,
yes.
okay. Thanks. I was genuinely curious. Any other questions about this? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more item before a break, and that is item number 5, which is informational discussion about the emergency loan program repayment which is a follow-up to one of our legislative intents. So this is economic development coming back to respond to something we asked them a year ago, I don't know, a long time ago.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I first want to thank Roberta and Lorena, who already had plans to come here, even though I neglected to remind them last week. So I appreciate that professionalism of checking the agenda, which I hadn't done. So the goal of this update is to provide for the council to provide guidance to Department of Economic Development staff on potential repayment options for the 2020 emergency loan program. So I have one basic policy question for council discussion and then some straw polls that would stem from that. But I'm wondering if you'd like some background first, since as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, it's been a minute.
Sure.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
So, well, and also, yes, for Councilmember Young.
And the public.
This was a $1 million program of no-interest loans to local small businesses and nonprofits for short-term relief at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was before federal aid or state aid became available. In September 2022, so just over a year ago, the council approved a deferment of repayment of all these loans until December 31st, 2024, in recognition of ongoing economic disruption. As of last August, about 10% of the 52 borrowers had paid off their loans. About 13% were in the process of paying them off, making monthly payments, and the remaining about 3/4 owed between $250 and $333 per month over 60 months. In the last briefing, the council recognized that there isn't a lot of incentive for borrowers to repay a 0% interest loan, especially when current interest rates are relatively high. And as you mentioned, the council approved 3 legislative intents related to this issue. The first was for a new deferment to be given to the end of 2024 and offering it as an opt-in process for each borrower. And the department reported that it has completed that. Second, there was a discount scale to current interest rates for borrowers who repay before the end of 2024. The attorney's office clarified that by state law, that would actually require an individual public benefits analysis for each one of the loans. And of course, that would be very expensive relative to the size of the loans that were offered. But the council could choose to do that if you would like. And then finally, that the department would propose criteria and processes for borrowers who can't repay loans. And council staff and the department staff would like to ask for feedback, particularly on this legislative intent. So the policy question here is essentially that the council's longstanding policy has been to prohibit any city loan from shifting from a loan to a grant. The October 22nd, 2022 work session, it wasn't clear whether some council members were proposing to change or suspend this loan policy. And I think that was part of the reason for some uncertainty about this. So the council, it would be great for us, we would appreciate it if the council would discuss whether to modify this policy or not. Would you like to consider loan forgiveness as an option for existing loans?
Did you say there were 3 options, Allison? 3 intents. Okay.
Lots of numbers.
Lots
Fast.
of different things. Okay. Lorena, do
Yes,
you want to add to
absolutely.
this? Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us back. And as it was described, we're talking about emergency loan program. When I first started in the department, it was ELP, and I thought it was English language proficiency. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the emergency loan program. So I just want to make some remarks that I think are very appropriate and reference to our last transmittal from July of 2023. I would like council to know that our department, Economic Development, we have never thought we had the authority to forgive any loans. Our goal has always been to come back to you if there was any proposal related to that issue, because we fully understand that that's a legislative decision and only council has the authority to do so. However, our transmittal that was submitted before you in July of 2023, we probably did confuse the issue, and I wanted to make sure that today we walk away with clear guidance to ensure that we bring you back criteria that is basically supportive through your legislative intent. Again, we just want to make sure that we accurately describe their economic development intent was to present basically hypotheticals. If we had company X come back to us and explain that they couldn't pay it, we just wanted to give you some of those hypotheticals in case this were to come up. Therefore, we would appreciate having a clear legislative guidance to ensure we're following it, and we want to ensure that we address and proceed with this request that we may be receiving by small businesses, given the fact that their loan has been deferred until December 2024. But a clear guidance would be wonderful for us to have to ensure that we're following it and we create a criteria in accordance with your intent.
So Lorena, we have already told the borrowers that they do not have to pay until December 2024. That has already been communicated.
That's correct. And that's a great question. I just want to...
There's zero interest during that period.
That's correct.
Okay.
I just want to let you know that out of the 52 loans that were provided back in 2020, 6 have been paid off. 7 recipients are now making payments, and the rest of the loan recipients have decided to defer until December 31st, 2024.
Okay.
Lauren,
Councilmember Valdemoros.
out of those 6 that have been paid off, how much money is that we?
Do you know the total of that?
Gosh, most of them were 20, because that was the majority of the loans, 20,000
About
each.
120,000.
So about $120,000.
I think there was one that was
10%.
lower
Okay,
than
about
that.
10% of the $1 million. Okay.
Yep.
And I think, Roberta, you have some additional information you may want to just...
That's okay. Like it's,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. It's just to understand more or less how much money we have.
Well, I appreciate, sorry, did I cut anyone off?
No, yeah.
Okay. I appreciate you bringing us these options. I think given where, I understand why we had the discussion back in 2022. Yeah. I think right now I don't feel inclined to forgive the loans, especially because some of the borrowers have already paid them off. I would hate to penalize people who decided to pay early by saying, if you were slow, you just don't have to pay. That doesn't feel right to me. So I'm not interested personally in forgiving all of them. I guess if there are specific businesses that have true financial hardship and they come to you and say they just simply can't pay it, then I don't know what the process is for that. But I would like those to be in case-by-case basis, not just forgive the rest of them. Peter and then Young.
I'm in almost exactly the same place. First of all, thank you for how quickly you activated and got these out to people during a time of crisis.
Thank you.
We're not going to continue to react as though this is a crisis. These were loans intended to be loans. I was on a board of an organization that received these and actually voted not to accept it, even though it was overruled, because it was a loan, and a loan is a very different thing from a grant. So the people who engaged in these were confirmed that it was a loan. We do have those who paid it off. I am highly, highly amenable to adjusting the term of repayment, if that's what we need to do, acknowledging that industries are not recovering at the same pace from the COVID experience.
So, and just to clarify too, thank you for that. We would definitely consider these on a case-by-case basis. It's not like something we would just offer out there. We presented in our last transmittal sort of a financial analysis that, you know, if you can't really, if this payment, this $333 a month is detrimental to your business being open, we're open to hearing, you know, a consideration for maybe a reduced payment. So it would be a process. It wouldn't just be a given And so I wanted to clarify that we have some parameters in place. What we put in here is that the department could consider different options, and then ultimately, if there was anything at the end of it, like if somebody did get a reduced payment for 5 years, and they made those payments on time, would there be consideration to forgive the rest? I guess that's the question on the table. And if you're saying no, that's great.
I'm disinclined.
Councilmember Young was next.
So I concur with Councilmember Mono related to like not moving forward with forgiveness through two lenses. One of them being that we do have businesses that have repaid, and it would seem very unfortunate and very inequitable to be able to tell those businesses for repaying early that they were somehow then at a financial detriment than if they had deferred. I also think about it through the lens of precedence. And regardless of this being specific to pandemic relief, if the city is going to engage in a process of transitioning loans into grants, that's concerning to me, because what precedence does that set related to other programs that we may issue and the community's expectation of repayment? So I would agree with you in terms of maintaining the loan, but then looking at some of those flexibilities on repayment plans.
I think I saw 3 council members' hands, and I don't know who's first, so let's go with
Thank you.
Dugan, then
I'm-
Valdemoros, then Pui.
I agree. I love the comments so far stated. And on the repayment side, you know, that if you have to extend it, I still want the loan paid out. Now, maybe there's some differences on incentivizing them to pay early by, hey, if you're already going to ask for another 5 years or X amount of years past the 5-year part, maybe there is a difference in the interest rates. Just as if, you know, on mortgage rates, right? You start out with a low mortgage interest rate, and to get into it, and then you think you're going to income, so you have it to increase it. So maybe the interest would be market rate after that 5-year point. But that's getting into the weeds right now, but I'm in
Councilmember Dugan, these loans are 0 interest rate.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what they signed, so like there's no
Yes.
way for us to add interest, right? Like that would be, yeah.
There is a late payment interest fee.
Yes,
that's
I would
added.
think with a late payment.
So
Or
that's-
if you're refinancing the past 5 years. That's what I'm saying, just refinancing the past 5 years. But I'm in agreement with Councilmember Mono and Young.
Okay, Councilmember Valdemoros?
So could you remember where the $1 million came out of? Was that just general
Actually,
fund?
really very, I mean, I would venture to say unprecedented for the city. It was from the city's general fund.
General fund.
So it was just in the moment, the city, not knowing what the federal government was going to do, decided to take money from the general fund and make it available to small businesses, which I can't recall in my time at the city that the city's ever done anything like that.
Was that out of leftover that we have the general funds, or out of our savings?
Those
like
were our
rainy
savings
day-
account.
Rainy days.
Yep.
Now I remember that.
Yep.
Yeah. So we do need to replenish our rainy day funds. Like that's something that we're I'm very like adamant about, because we had rainy day savings, we were able to help, but we don't know what the future holds. So we do need the money back to help, for whatever. Knock on wood, we won't have catastrophe like that, but if we do, we need those. And then the other question I had: any of those businesses that are not paying yet, or for whatever reason, are they in the verge of closing, or have any of them closed their doors? And that's something that we could potentially consider. I mean, if it didn't work, if this aid didn't help them, there's nothing else that they can do.
So I think the last time we were here about a year ago, we let you know that there was one nonprofit that had closed, but coincidentally, they actually paid us off.
Okay.
So they
wow.
they closed their doors,
And they
but
paid
they
us.
had some money, and they left, and their board decided to, or hopefully, gave us the money for that. And then another one has closed. There's 2 other businesses that closed. One of them is a wholesale company that closed, and the other one was a food truck that closed but reopened has a new business.
A new business, okay.
So nothing has changed as far as we know from that status. So really very few. And to be honest, we're really grateful for the extended recovery. And so by the beginning of 2025, a $333 payment a month, we don't expect that to be very, a big hardship for businesses. Just
Right, no,
anecdotally,
yeah.
us talking on the street to people, I'll recognize that Recover has been different across the board for different industries. So these sort of situations we laid out in this, took into account that we have no idea what's going to be in 20 or 12, 14 months, what the state of some of the small businesses will be in. So that's sort of where that came from, while also listening to some of the conversation. We went back, the discussion that we had last year with the council members.
Okay. I just want to say your clear guidance on this is really helpful because that's how we will proceed in accordance with your guidance. So, and thank you for recognizing that Salt Lake City was one of the first cities to get any funding out there to our local community and our local business community.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Pui.
Quickly, this might be too out of the box, but I have some thoughts. Obviously I agree we shouldn't set a precedent. I think that's the most important piece of this because we do engage in loans across the board in different organizations in the city, and I have concerns with that. But are there ways that some of these businesses could pay in kind through some of the programs that we do? And I think that I'm not asking you to answer this question right now. And I know it's much complicated, and if there is a monetary value in things that we do. I mean, the city often, I don't know what kind of businesses these are. I wonder if that's even a possibility or illegal to do so. And I think that Jennifer wants to say something.
Just once you're finished, based on previous guidance and some information contained in the transmittal, I think that there is a legal mechanism, but it would be a public benefits analysis, and we've done that in the past when we've exchanged city resources for either in-kind or reduced value contributions to the city, but it would require an individual public benefits analysis for each
of them.
For each of them. I think that may fit, though, with what Councilmember Mono was saying earlier. If there's truly a case where a business cannot pay, maybe there is one, where it's worth economic development coming back to the council and saying, this is such a unique situation that we are recommending in this one case. But I don't know if that's what you had in mind.
And I would require by ordinance to do the public analysis.
That's required by state law.
By state law, okay.
And we have
So
to-
now, so the answer to that question, if you can find a bargain on, that. But in any case, the other thing that I want to overlay on this information is, have any of these businesses or been impacted by construction at the same time? 300 West, for example, or 900, and could we overlay those maps together? And I think that is an interesting piece of information for me, because then I have more information about those businesses, and one could argue something there, if that makes sense, right? Like if a business was impacted by a lot of construction, and they already have this, and they're saying that they cannot pay, they have an argument about the impacts. But again, I think that ultimately I want us to find ways for them to pay, and that might require longer terms, extending some of these deadlines if that's possible. So
I guess are the businesses telling you that they can't pay?
No.
Or we just told them you have until December 2024. So, I mean, if I'm a business owner and I have a zero interest loan with zero payment until December 2024, I'm not paying until December 2024 because that's the time value of money. So I guess.
We think most of them are waiting.
I mean, that's actually the smart financial decision. So I think maybe my thought, and I don't want to speak for the whole council, but is let's just expect them to start paying in January 1st, 2025. And if people cannot, then come back to us with what the proposed remedies might be.
We can definitely do that.
And Mr. Chair, and
Baldomos.
and depending on where they're at by then, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed on a reduced payment. If you guys, if you found that most of them are saying if it was reduced, then I would be able to pay. That would be fine with me. But just, to reiterate, I think we pride ourselves, like the council, in having these rainy day funds, like this percentage always every year, so that we're prepared, for anything. And I think we've shown like our frugality in a way, or our wisdom in having those funds there, because when the catastrophe happened, we were able to recover.
So
because we had
we
that
will
money.
probably start reaching out to them next summer and letting them know that this is coming up. So we'll have an internal process to ensure that, we hit this January 1st and what the expectations are.
Thank you.
That makes sense, thank you.
All right. Sounds like that gave you direction, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we're scheduled for a break now, council members, until 4:25. So, yeah, so we get an extra 3 minutes of break.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Minutes early. No, only one. So let's just get started again. The next item on our agenda is item number 7, which is an ordinance about open space lands amendments. We have with us Allison Rowland, Council Policy Analyst, who will introduce this, and then Kristen Reichert, our Director of Public Lands, and Kimberly Trichus, our Senior City Attorney, here to walk us through this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to say thank you for Kimberly's help on this. She helped me catch some imprecision in my language, and so the staff report has been updated since the one that was originally in the packet to try to straighten those out. But I'll let her explain those things. I just want to give you a quick overview. These ordinance amendments would change the process for sale, lease, or easement in city open space lands, which is a term of art, and it would govern their removal from official city open space inventory. You can take a look at that inventory or a map of that inventory which is there as an attachment to your staff report if you're curious. In most cases, disposition of city property is an administrative process, as you know, but additional steps are required by city ordinance for designated significant parcels, another term of art, or open space lands. And these extra steps came at the request of a previous council who wanted to ensure that selling open space be a very deliberative, open process, basically because of the high value that city residents place on public open spaces. And so the amendments would create an exemption to these requirements under two conditions, and only if it is approved by the director of the Department of Public Lands. The conditions are when any public utility easements do not interfere in a property's intended use or character, and two, when there is a sale or exchange of de minimis parcels that is less than 1 acre. The council would still receive notice, and public hearings would still be required for other types of easement sales or exchanges which affect other open space lands and other significant properties. There is action scheduled for this on November 7th. So I will turn it over to Kristen and Kimberly.
Thanks, Allison.
There we go. We're really here just to answer any questions that you might have about this requested change.
Council members? Okay, Councilmember Valdemoros? No?
Sorry, and do it. No.
I was just going to, oh, sorry.
Do you
Just clarification, it's a quarter acre. Quarter acre, okay.
Or less.
So, just so that I'm clear on this, you're saying if the exception are required. So I'm a little confused. Like, so if it's less than a quarter acre, then we're going to sell it off, or doesn't need a easier process. Okay.
Right, or an exchange is usually,
And
it's the last one that happened at Bridge to Bachman. It delayed that project by over a year.
Okay.
And it was a very, very small piece of property, and our park was going a little bit into the state's property, and the state's property was a little bit in our park, and when we're making improvements, we have to make sure the parcel is accurate, and so then we have to go through the disposition process.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can just
yep.
share a little context if
Yes,
that would be
please.
helpful. The council adopted the processes to get rid of to dispose of open space. I want to say, was it 2006, 7? Anyway, the point of it was to make the process quite cumbersome and transparent, because the policy goal that the council has to really highly value open space, and the council cannot regulate the administration's ability to sell, but you can set up a process by which they have to go through to sell, because getting rid of property, acquisition and disposition of property is an administrative function. So the council's ordinance sets up all the guidelines of what you have to follow in order to get rid of open space, and it was intended to be quite long so that it would be a big deal. And I think in the years since, like Director Riker said, there have been a few cases where it seems like a no-brainer, or it seems like this is just for a utility easement, and then we're kind of forcing our own hand to go through a long process when it's really quite a straightforward and even beneficial thing sometimes for the city. So I think this was intended to address some of those cases that we've come across in the last few years where it's felt like overly cumbersome for something that's quite simple.
Thanks for that. So regardless of the parcel size or importance, we're making it easier to grant utility easements as long as the use of that stays the same. And then if it's a quarter acre or less, then sale, or exchange becomes also easier or quicker.
That's correct.
Okay. Would there be any situation where it's over a quarter of an acre, but we're going, like, 'cause with Bridge to Bachman, we basically kept the same amount of open space. We just traded to make the development better. Is that exchange of like an equal amount of open space?
It would have to be
over a
like
quarter?
for like, so
Yeah.
the exchange would have to be the same amount of properties.
I guess what I'm saying is, are we going to find a different, similar to Bridge to Bachman project where it's like 0.27 acres and you have to go through this whole process when really we're just exchanging like for like and maybe.
We might, but I mean, Public Lands really does like the process. We want it to be long and burdensome, and we don't want it to be easy, except for in instances where it's a de minimis amount of property where that exchange could happen. But we do like the public process and think it's important.
Okay, I'm happy then. Any other questions, council members? That was really fast.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to, item number 8 has been removed from the agenda. That was the UTA TechLink study. UTA has requested to present that to us at a different date. So we're on to item number 9, which is a resolution about local nonprofit direct assistance grant awards. Ben Ludke from council staff will introduce this, and then Tony Milner. I see Heather Royale, but I think she's staying in the audience, and I don't know. Are you Jack?
Yes, I am.
Jack Markman. Great.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In April last year, the council approved one-time $2 million for local nonprofit direct assistance grants. The Community and Neighborhoods Department manages these funds, which are separate from the other $2 million managed by the Economic Development Department for local business assistance grants. The advisory committee and the mayor are recommending awarding the full $2 million to 23 nonprofits. You should each have a hard copy of the funding log. This is also available as a PDF, attachment 1. And we have extra copies on the table in the corner for anyone who wants one. The council has final decision-making authority over the awards. This includes the dollar amounts and the uses. The funding recommendations propose to award the full eligible amount requested by the applicant. So as you're looking on the funding log, you'll see the amount requested, the amount eligible, and if they are recommended for funding, it's the same amount as the eligible amount. And I point this out because it's a different approach than what was used for the local business assistance grants, where the amount proposed was a percentage of the eligible amount. So different approaches between the two. There are 40 applications. These were scored by the advisory committee. The funding log is organized from the highest score to the lowest score. You'll see the scores in the rightmost column. There were 5 organizations that submitted multiple applications recommended to receive funding. You can see a list of those 5 organizations and their associated applications on page 2 of the staff report. One of the policy questions is if you would like to continue the practice that was used previously for the business assistance grants to round the awards to the nearest $100. This is done twice previously for the business grants, and the finance department has recommended it as a best practice moving forward. There are some additional policy questions on page 3 of the staff report, and Tony and his team have a presentation for you.
Great, thanks, Ben. Can we get the first slide up? Great, perfect. Again, thanks, Ben, for teeing it up so well, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, Council, for your time and energy to review and provide a final recommendation for these funds. Next slide. So we just want to make sure that the distribution and management of this funding has been managed in accordance with the direction provided by Council in City Code 2.20. The language is very specific to funding managed by CAN and is detailed in 2.20.040. So the funding is to be distributed to nonprofits who support communities disproportionately affected by COVID-19, with the focus areas including the following 6 categories, which you'll see is broken out in one of your columns in the funding log. Again, these are retrained displaced workers providing legal and other assistance for evictions or rent relief, expanding educational opportunities, deploying resources to mitigate the digital divide, supporting parents or children affected by COVID-19, including childcare and other after-school program, and providing access to healthcare services, including mental health support. Can we get the next slide?
So just detailing, picking up where Ben left off on some of these details, going over a program review. So as was mentioned, these are one-time funds for nonprofits to provide services for low to moderate income members of the community impacted by COVID-19. Council allocated $2 million to be distributed by CAN, and if approved, can award the full $2 million in this request. The committee had 40 applications submitted for review. They reviewed all of them for merit and cost eligibility, as was mentioned. And the funding focused on direct services. This is something to note, I would say, provided by applicants to at-risk community members as opposed to revenue replacement or operational costs, which was the focus of the DED funding.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time.
Do I need to get closer to the mic?
Yeah, get real
Okay.
close.
I will get, is this better? Okay, thank you. Can we go to the next slide?
Are recommended for funding?
No, so 40
there's the cutoff.
applications were submitted and were all reviewed, and 23 are being recommended for funding.
Okay, so just the first 23.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
So touching on service eligibility a bit more in detail. So drawing from the guidance provided in City Council Ordinance, City Code Chapter 220, also other guidelines were used were city and federal grant management best practices like 2 CFR 200 and ARPA guidelines, which were used previously as requirements and are now as best practice guidelines for the funding, now that it's no longer ARPA dollars. Some of those guidelines included, again, this being direct services, as mentioned here, that funding go to Salt Lake City residents, so individuals and households within the municipal boundaries of the city, that it serve individuals, low to moderate income households, COVID recovery funds, and that the award amount, no single application for a community grant would exceed $100,000. So you'll see that all of them are at or below that threshold. And then that the spending down timeline would be that all funds must be spent by December 31st, 2024. There's a little, you might see a little asterisk there, that this timeline was previously established by ARPA guidelines and was reinforced by City Code. So that is written into Code Chapter 220 that funds must be spent by December 31st of next year. Can we get the next slide? So just to briefly go over the review process done by the Community Recovery Committee. These applications were reviewed February to April of this calendar year. Just taking a moment to do a shout out for the committee. They've done an excellent job with this program. They just recently concluded reviewing applications for both our funding and DED's funding. I think that totaled around 400 applications that they've been reviewing almost weekly for the last 10 months. So they've done a great deal of work and we're grateful for them. So just giving them a little shout out here. Some of the guidelines that they used in reviewing applications was objective alignment, so how the grants would align with city code, what the purpose of the funding was, which is to support underserved communities and mitigate the effects of COVID. Eligible spending, so if proposed grant uses aligned with service eligibility requirements, so within those guidelines established by code mentioned by Tony. And if the intended use of funds aligned just with requirements established by federal best practices, 2 CFR 200, and their intended use for the funding. Next slide. So just in summary, the recommendation today is for the committee and the mayor's recommendation of 23 applicants for the full $2 million through a department as established by city code. The budget impact, this will be coming from the general fund because the dollars have been allocated for general funding, even though it used to be ARPA dollars. And we believe that about 13,000 people will be served by this funding just based on the applicants submitted. And we will be following up with those applicants that are approved to provide funding knowledge or provide details to council staff about what those outputs will be at sunset of the program. And that's the end of our presentation. We're happy to take questions.
Okay, great. And then just so we understand what our role our role in this is, Ben, this is feeling very similar to the CDBG public services categories, a lot of the same names we're seeing here. So is this a similar process where we can make adjustments to this like we do sometimes with CDBG?
That's correct.
According to
that is
council
an
priorities.
apt analogy. The council can shift funds between. The recommendations and the scores are a guide. You are not bound by the committee's advisory scores.
Okay, great. Does anyone want to jump in first?
I just have some thoughts. I feel like I'm very excited that most of these applications that have been awarded by the committee and by the mayor are related to mental health assistance. That's something that it's in my mind, that it's in our minds all the time, and I'm excited that the services will be provided post-pandemic to help our community with this mega issue that we're experiencing. Having that said, there are other groups that I'm interested because I know them and in the programs that they provide, which is, after the pandemic hit and after perhaps losing your job or whatever that was, or getting another job, or all that, whatever may have happened to your financials during the pandemic, I do feel like NeighborWorks here has like a really good proposal to help people with a new pathway, post-pandemic, on how to figure out their finances and combat whatever it is that they had to go through during the pandemic. So
are you referring to item number 24?
24, yeah.
Which is the first one that didn't receive any funding.
Right. And so I'm thinking that's another way of helping with this, because community recovery assistance grants, right? And so to me that reads community recovery, also help people figure out their finances, be responsible, and not depend so much on public assistance, and what the next steps are. Yeah. But I don't know where to.
Do you have a proposal out of the 90,000 eligible?
I don't know if we can do 90,000.
This is spreading peanut butter.
Yeah.
There's no more.
No way we can do 90,000.
There's no more full asks happening here.
Right.
So I think that, keep in mind, if we want to add funding, we have to take it away from somebody else, right?
And so
That's right. One of the things we could do is, we've taken this approach with CDBG before, is council members signaling potential shifts and then getting information from the applicants about if they would be able to use that amount of funding. Like if the funding would be used for an FTE, but the proposal is only $10,000, might not be enough to hire the FTE for them.
Okay. I guess in reviewing this, and also we have time, councilors, so if you want to go page by page and talk about what these programs would do, we can do that. My first thought on this is all great organizations that I want to support. A lot of the ones that, there are 3 specific ones that I am familiar with that are also in my district that I think do really good work for the community, which aren't funded, which are the Alliance House, the In Between, and Fit to Recover. All 3 really great places in my district that serve people, different people. One is a hospice for homeless, one is adults with severe mental health disorder, and the other is individuals exiting incarceration. So all three really good organizations, none presented for funding. I'm not sure yet that I am ready to advocate for funding for all of them, because I don't know where I would take them away, but I am looking at the ones that are funded, and I see a lot of duplicates where the same organization applied for like either multiple locations or multiple programs, and I'm wondering if it might not be in our best interest to spread, if we're going to try and spread peanut butter, maybe we take a little bit away from those organizations that received more than one allocation. I think 4. First Step House has 2, United Way has 3, the Children's Center has 2, there's 5, the Road Home has 2, and the Asian Association has 2. So I guess all of those are organizations that I do want to support, so I don't want to remove entirely all of the funding, but if they could still make a big impact with one of their requests or 1.5 of them, and we could put some of the money to other organizations, that's something I'm interested in considering. Councilor Dugan.
The policy question about Benyon Elementary, I mean, I don't want to fund their program, but also don't want the school to close either. So it's kind of like a tricky, they have a great program. We're looking to fund it. But then, boy, does it get on the chopping block. Where does that funding go? Or how's that work? And how does that play out in that arena? Not going either way. I'm just throwing that question out there because it's longer. It deserves more attention than just this 5-minute discussion here.
Yeah, I guess I would like some more information on what the United Way, what's a well-being room?
So a well-being room for the United Way programs are basically just, there's no infrastructure that's being added for those. It's basically just putting together resources for, I imagine, a mental health space where students can go and collaborate and feel and sort of escape the issues that they may be experiencing at school that resulted from COVID.
Councilmember Young knows the answer to this question.
I do know the answer to that question. And so very similar, it's really about repurposing an existing space that allows for students to oftentimes take what we call a brain break or a mental health break related to, especially a student who may be experiencing kind of duress or a behavior outburst, and they just need that opportunity to kind of regroup themselves in a non-public space. So it's actually more and more common in our schools, but there's not necessarily a dedicated funding stream for it. They have to find those through community grants and such.
Interesting.
So why is that, just asking, like, why does that require salaries?
So in my experience with schools, I can't speak to this particular project because I haven't read the full proposal, but oftentimes they do assign staff either through a paraeducator, because if a student is in there, they can't be left unattended. And so it's something where if you are going to have a child go there, especially departing a classroom, that classroom teacher can't be both places at once, and they need another individual to be able to provide that direct supervision.
Where does it say that salary? Oh, over in this
He's
category.
looking at the Rose
Okay.
Park Charter School, not at the Benyon one. The Benyon
Benyon
one
doesn't
is
have salaries. Rose
from
Park
training.
and Bryant do, which is interesting.
I feel like I need to disclose them. I have a child at Bryant Elementary, or Bryant Middle.
I have no children at any of these schools, but I care about the children that go there and their mental health. So, I mean, that seems like a program. I guess my question for that one is that a program that requires the full $100,000 to happen, or can they build like a pretty good well-being room with $75,000? I don't know. the 100,000. I know we put that cap on it at 100,000, so why wouldn't you ask for 100,000? But like, if they can actually provide that service for less, maybe that's a place where we can funnel a little bit of money to other nonprofits that weren't funded.
Sure. I would say that a lot of these agencies, because it's a nonprofit that is providing the funds to the school itself, they can often make do with what they're provided. They generally ask for the maximum amount just because they have their fingers in a lot of different pots just to do their best to do this sort of thing. I know that with DED's funding, they reduce the amount based on the score. I think that we would have to go on a case-by-case basis from recommended awardees to see if they could do their program with the reduced ask, but I imagine a lot of them could.
And we're happy to follow up with United Way in particular.
I guess I would just be interested in the ones where there's multiple allocations for the same organization, if they could reduce theirs by a certain percentage. And if, I know we're asking them to say, is it okay if we give you less money, which is an awkward thing to ask, but if some of them can still make a big impact, then I would be interested in knowing.
So I'm going to chime in and get on my not council soapbox and remind everyone that, number one, grant reviewing is an inherently human process, which means that it is inherently flawed as well as we make it as good as we can, but it's inherently flawed. I absolutely loathe the concept of tying the amount given to a score given. I mean, things as simple as grammar or punctuation can be the difference in a few points on an application, no matter how wonderful and how trained your grant reviewers are. So I want that to be put out there, first of all. Second of all, best practice in nonprofit world is to expect 3 rejections to every 1 acceptance. You should be prospecting 4 times the amount you need. United Way is an amazing organization that is well versed in development best practices. They are not going to be devastated if we should still check with them. But all of their eggs are not in our basket. So I think we are on relatively safe ground. The number of times any grant writer sees a full return on their grant, whatever the request is, I mean, it's a low percentage. I'm talking below 10%. Almost every time you write a grant, you get less than you ask for. It is part of the grant making process. So not saying that we have to, but just saying for those of us who are in the world where we write grants as a means of accomplishing things, we are not erring outside of a standard deviation for what's expected. I do like the idea that we check with people to make sure that it's still useful.
Councilmember Young?
Yeah, and I would just like to follow up on that kind of best practice and protocol. Ben mentioned our financial department recommending we round to the nearest $100. I think that that's always a good practice, both in terms of record keeping and accounting. And so if that's something we could also encourage staff to look at related to these final awards, I'd appreciate it.
I guess one question I'll have is, are there any other council members that are looking at some organizations that were not funded that would want to call some of those out? Councilmember Wharton.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Valdemoros kind of did, but for NeighborWorks, I think that, to me, that the program description makes a lot of sense about why that would be connected to COVID-19 and how that, could potentially pay back in dividends for financial literacy and coaching for those businesses. So I would like to find money for that program.
I'm going to second Alliance House. The niche and the population that they serve is really unique, and the way they serve them is really unique. And I would like us to consider who does get CDBG funding from us and maybe prioritize spreading the peanut butter to people who don't typically get to depend on us for funding.
Alliance House is number 32.
And I don't think they get, and I would say out of the 3 that I mentioned, that's probably my number 1 priority as well, just given the population that they serve and the model that they have, I really believe in. And I also don't think that they get do they Have we given them public services CDBG money before? I don't remember them on our list.
No, but they actually are a past recipient of Funding Our Future housing program funding.
Funding Our Future. Oh, interesting. Okay. Any other council members? I know we just are looking at this. Okay. Well, it sounds like NeighborWorks and Alliance House might be the two that have multiple council members interested in finding some funding for those. I would be supportive of finding funding for both. And I guess if I don't know that we need to, I guess the request of staff would be to go talk to those two organizations and see what they can do with $50,000 or so, and then go talk to the organizations that have multiple funding allocations given to them and see if what they can, like, what it would mean for us to take 5 or 10 from each of those applications ish. I don't know, maybe we need more than that, I don't know, but does that sound okay to council members?
I would also like to know from 11 and 12 that both are for the road home.
Yeah.
One's for access to health services and one to mental health. I thought that like 4th Street Clinic and other medical providers already were going to those facilities and providing health access. So is there any possibility between those two and 4th Street that there can be more coordination of an effort on those funds? If I'm wrong, then I'm happy to hear why, but that's my understanding is so.
Councilman, if the answer comes back that those health services are contractually provided and that the road home pays a contract to 4th Street, does that change your estimation at all of it?
Kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't I see 4th Street Clinic on here somewhere?
15.
Is their number 15?
Number 15.
Okay, and they are recommended for funding. Okay.
I'm willing to bet, but we should clarify. I'm willing to bet that there's a contractual obligation between 4th Street and Road Home. So this is 4th Street may be providing it to multiple constituencies, but the funding source is unique and probably needed in order for the Road Home to make good on that contract, is what I'm suspecting is happening here.
I mean, I think it would, I think it depends on the terms of the contract. It could benefit it or it could burden it.
Okay. I don't see any others that are jumping out to me that I want to ask questions on, but it sounds like we can have a follow-up discussion on November 7th. Is that correct?
We have some staff availability questions we need to work through with you, so it'll either be the 7th or the 14th.
Okay.
We'll also work on, depending on agenda timing and how long it takes the administration to get back to us on.
And I guess we can ask administrative staff to work with our staff to figure out how long it'll take to get answers to those questions.
Yes, exactly.
Tony.
Thanks.
Any other questions on this, council members?
Yeah, one more.
Go ahead.
Just, I mean, I hate to even raise this because the Children's Center is amazing and they do amazing work, and I have children clients that go there, but are they not moving to another city? And like, does that matter?
Oh.
We can come follow up with that in terms of this
I think
application.
they're moving to West Valley, and I don't know if that's if that matters, but I thought I saw that announcement.
Well, we definitely said that it needs to be service. It needs to provide service to Salt Lake City residents, right?
Right.
That was one
So
of
that'll
our.
be the case regardless.
But that could still
Maybe
happen in
doesn't
West
matter,
Valley. But
right? Yeah.
There are a couple of applicants for other agencies where their sites and locations are within the city boundaries, but it's been made clear to them that they will be serving city residents. But we can
with
follow
this
up.
funding.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'd be interested in all of the ones that had more than one application, in just finding out what they can do with less.
Yeah, I'll just do the back of the napkin here. There's 10 that are getting basically a full funding of or 9 getting full funding of 100,000. Then they requested that. So if you did the, not everyone's going to get a full grant. Like Councilmember Petro said, you reduce it by 10%. That's actually one more person or one more organization getting the grant without really impacting across the board. So there is some room there. Of course, if it doesn't impact them that greatly, that you could actually add an additional one or two possibly organizations.
Yeah.
Just back of the napkin type of math.
It sounds like we want to spread the peanut butter a little bit, so help us figure out how to do that.
I want to say that we appreciate your initial spread of the peanut butter, and it was based on very good principles. Thanks for dealing with us as humans who want to redo your work.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we will move on to item number 10 is a written briefing about amended interlocal agreement for the 2023 election services with the county. So we're moving on to numbers 11, and we're a little bit ahead of time. So if some of these people are not here, we will come back. We will take a break and come back to them. But we first have 3 board appointments to the Police Civilian Review Board. Those are Ben Raskin, Thomas Walker, and Antonio Esquivel. I see all 3 of you here. Okay, great. Why don't we just go in that order? Ben, if you'll come up first. And we are, first of all, I just want to say to all 3 of you and the 3 that we'll be speaking to in a moment for the Historic Landmark Commission, thank you for being willing to serve the city. It's often thankless work, and we really appreciate residents that are willing to do this. These are all recommendations by the mayor, and we are confirming those. And so we just ask that you, for our sake and for the public's sake, give us a quick couple-minute introduction to who you are, what your experience is, and why this specific board is of interest to you.
Thank you. First off, it's very nice to be with all of you again. The last time we were here with us, you appointed Councilwoman Young to the job that I was asking for, but that's I'll hold that past you. But at the end of it, Councilman Apui said something that really stuck with me. He said there's more ways to serve than winning elected office. Board appointments, there's volunteer opportunities.
Ben, I think the people in the Zoom world can't hear you, so if you'll just like almost kiss the microphone.
But anyway, so... Oh, is that better? Usually I don't get accused of being too quiet, so... But anyway, Councilmember Apui said there's more ways to serve than winning elected office, and that there's board appointments out there. And I took his advice, and I went onto the website, and I looked at all the board appointments that were there, and the one with the most teeth was the Civilian Police Review Board. I am intrigued by this because I think there's value on both sides of this coin. Law enforcement needs to be held accountable for the actions that they do, but conversely, our police officers need the support of our citizens and the city to do the work that they're doing. So there needs to be a balance found between this, and I feel as if like this is not a job where you come in with a tabula rasa, but rather it's the ability to call balls and strikes, to listen to the evidence, to hear what the district attorney or the internal affairs are bringing before the board, and make decisions based upon what is presented. It's to leave your prejudice is at the door, and to basically try and do the best you can for the 3-year appointment there. So that's what brought me to this point. Fascinated by public safety. You know, I think public safety is key for our entire community, and that bad actors need to be held accountable for that. So I'm looking forward to learning from this position. I've already done one of my 3 police ride-alongs. I encourage everyone to spend 4 hours with our cops out there. The work that they do is both challenging, dynamic, and very, very interesting, sometimes equally mundane and dangerous. You know, we stopped at one place where a guy was throwing an axe into a tree at a park, you know, and they kept yelling, "Come with us, Raskin." I'm like, ah. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to serve on this board, and thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Ben. Council members? Councilmember Young?
I just have to say thank you, not just as a District 7 resident, but your commitment to this city through you showing up, not just here today related to this particular opportunity, but that you are at community meetings after community meeting after community meeting. And when we talk about individuals who are willing to give to the city of their time and expertise, I just can think of no one better than you, Ben. So thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thanks, Ben.
Also,
Councilmember Wharton.
Oh, I also just wanted to thank you. I know you also ran for the District 7 spot, and it's hard to not get appointed, but I think it's even harder to lose an election after all the amount of work and time that you put into it, and the fact that you're still wanting to come back and help and serve the city in a way is really commendable. So I'm really excited to support you in this.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your services.
Thank you very much.
You'll be on our consent agenda tonight, and that's when it will become official. You do not need to be present for that. The next is Thomas Walker. And same instructions, just introduce yourself and why you're interested in Police Civilian Review Board. Make sure the green light is on your microphone. Okay, and talk really close to it. It's not, I think it's not on. Is it really bright green, or is it just sort of? Maybe try push the.
Oh, there we go.
Now it's more green.
Now I'm much louder.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Tom Walker. I am a native of Salt Lake, and the reason I got interested in this to begin with was I read an article in the Tribune that said there were lots of vacant positions, and it was the city was having a hard time filling roles. I'm retired. I've got time on my hands, and I was interested also back when the University of Utah was on a quarter system. A graduate class I was in did what they call an ethnograph with the South Salt Lake Police. And for the better part of a half year, I rode with every officer in South Salt Lake, every shift. And it was an interesting experience. I thought, well, why not? I've certainly had plenty of exposure of the right kind to police officers and what they do. And I thought I can lend a hand.
Excellent. Councilors, any questions?
Thank you for stepping up and for being willing to represent District 3 on this commission.
Certainly.
Great. Thank you for your willingness to serve. And just like I mentioned before, you'll be on our consent agenda tonight, but you don't need to be there in person.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
I could have done it virtually, but why not show up and you can see
It's
what
nice
kind
to
of
see people
what
in
kind
person,
of a guy
so
I
thank you.
look
Yeah.
like.
It is nice to see people in person, so thanks.
And I've actually had calls from 2 officers telling me that they've been asked to set up ride-alongs with me.
Great.
I've called them back. We haven't gotten in touch, and my guess is that for them this is kind of a pain in the rear. So I'm being patient, but I'll keep following up, and we'll eventually ride along with them.
Don't let them fool you.
Chief
Ride-alongs.
Probably listening, so we'll make
Don't
sure
let them fool you. Ride-alongs are their favorite thing ever.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Other questions? Okay.
Looks like
All
you're
right.
off the hook. Thanks for being willing to serve the city. And Antonio Esquivel.
This is now lit.
And please correct me on my pronunciation if I got it wrong. Hello.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. What is it you want?
Just introduce yourself and why you're interested in the Police Civilian Review Board.
Oh, well, I'll introduce myself as Antonio Escobar, a resident of District 2. And I just have a lot of experience through my whole life from military. In the military, I was a military policeman. My associate's degree is in criminal justice. My bachelor's is in social work. my master's in social work, and I'm new to Salt Lake. I've been here 3 years. I feel like I need to get involved in what's going on in my city, and I chose this board because my wife twisted my arm. She said, it's time for you. You've been retired 12 years. You need to get out and do something. I said, I've done enough. I don't need to do any more. But she twisted my arm, and I'm here, and I've gone through all the hoops, so I hope that my appointment tonight will be a fast and easy one. Experienced in boards and commissions. I've been in New Mexico. I was on the school board and had the vice president, and the presidency on that board. I moved to Colorado, and I was chair of my party in my county. I was elected to city council 2 terms. I served as mayor when our mayor resigned. So I have a lot of board, and I bring a wealth of experience to the city. So I hope to apply it and use it in a good way.
Former mayor and council member, thank you for being willing to serve on the Police Civilian Review Board.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Councilmember Pui.
I got to know this family a little bit, and even if it's interrupting them when they're doing your work, or just being in their neighborhood and seeing them out and about in a park with their family, or it's the kind of neighbors we all wish to have. And your willingness to serve the community, and this is not it, right? This is part of it, but there is so much more that you guys do, and your better half. You guys are fantastic neighbors, and we're lucky to have you on the board. I need to be worried about what you want to do next.
I know. I was going to say Councilmember Pui. And really great bolo tie. So you'll be on the consent agenda tonight, and you don't need to be here in person. You can take a big handful of those.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. All right, we're moving on to item 12 on our agenda, which is more board appointments, this time for the Historic Landmark Commission. Alan Barnett, Adrienne White, and Jared Stewart. Are you all here in person? Let's start with you in the front row. I'm guessing Adrienne.
That's correct. So I live in District 7. My name is Adrienne White. I purchased my very first home in Sugar House in December of 2020. At that time, my house was what the listing considered mid-construction, so I spent all of 2021 with my dad renovating my home. And during that time, I fell in love with every inch of my house. And as a result, I started doing a ton of research about every person that's lived in my house. And it was so insightful and so exciting to learn about the people and the stories that lived in my house before me. So as a result of that, I started a business called House Genealogy, where I help other people research the histories of their homes as well as buildings around town. And so through that, I became involved with Preservation Utah. I'm on their Historic Properties Committee. And then I also joined the Sugar House Community Council and serve on the Land Use and Zoning Committee. It's really important for me to be involved in my community outside of the things that I do in my business, to get an understanding of what's going on, especially with our historic buildings. So being on the Preservation Utah Historic Properties Committee is great, and being on the Land Use and Zoning Committee for the Sugar House Community Council is also great. But those two things don't really fill the full pie for me in terms of having an understanding of what's going on with our historic buildings and how we can protect them. So that's why this position kind of fills the rest of the pie for me in terms of being able to be an advocate for the historic buildings that we have in our city.
That's a lovely story.
Thank you.
And that's great about your house.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Young?
So Adrienne, I'm so glad you're here. And like I said, that you're willing to share your expertise. Something I'll just share about Adrienne that I really think resonated with me when we first met is the fact that when you talk about buildings, you talk about them like they're people. And they have a story and they have a history, and all of those pieces contribute to why they're of value to you. And so I'm just really grateful that you're going to bring that expertise to this particular work with the city, because I do think it's important that we consider how those historic buildings really contribute to the character moving forward. So excited for that to be represented for District 7.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your kind words.
I got to know Adrian. Excuse me, I'm just jumping right in.
Just go ahead, Councilman Warren.
At the
Fisher Mansion.
Fisher Mansion, yeah, and just going through the carriage house and seeing the changes there and how interested you were and the questions that you asked was an excellent interview for this position, and I'm so glad that you're going to be serving in it.
Thank you so much. It means a lot.
Yep.
And your business sounds really interesting
It
too. I've
is.
never
It's
heard
so
of that
fun.
kind of a business,
Yeah.
and that's cool.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. You're obviously very interested in this and specific to this
Very
board.
much so. Well, thank
appreciate
you all so much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, Alan or Jared are one. Okay. Whoever's fastest, I guess. Are you Alan or are you Jared?
I am Alan.
Okay, Alan. I don't know if you were here with when we were for the instructions, but just introduce yourself and why you're interested in the Historic Landmark Commission, and let us know what district you live in.
I'm Alan Barnett, and I live in District 2 in the Fair Park neighborhood.
Could you get a little closer to the microphone?
Sorry about that. Okay. Do you want me to repeat that? I'm Alan Barnett. I live in District 2 in the Fair Park neighborhood in a historic home. I have a background in historic preservation. That's what I got my degree in from the University of Utah some years ago. And so I've always had an interest in historic buildings, and I live in a historic neighborhood and own a historic home. And I feel really strongly about what historic buildings contribute to our community, both historic neighborhoods and individual buildings. And I also I like to be involved and somehow find a way to contribute to the community, give back to the community. And this seemed like a way where I could bring some experience and expertise to giving back to the community. So it seemed like a good sort of public service opportunity and a place where I could make a contribution.
Great, thank you. Any council members?
Chair, we're neighbors, and
Yeah, we live just a block away.
Yeah, maybe even closer than that. And the amount of care for this his house and the amount of love that this historical structure shows, and I'm very happy to see you on this board. So I cannot wait to hear from you about what you bring to the table. So very excited to see you participate on this board and representing the West Side and the beautiful contribution in the West Side we have to historical structures too. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. You'll be on our consent agenda tonight, which is when your appointment will become official, but you don't need to be there in person.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. And Jared Stewart, I'm guessing, person in the back row.
All right. Good afternoon, Council. Hopefully, I'm close enough.
Yeah.
That's always repeated in every meeting that's in here. It seems like so. I am a resident of District 4. I purchased a condominium at Pierpont Lofts in about 3.5 years ago. So it's not listed as a historic building, but it is 120 years old in just this next year. And I've been on the HOA board there for about a year now, serving as president of the HOA. So we get to do a lot of his preservation-esque, repairs and that sort of thing. The bulk of my interest in historic preservation and experience comes from my work in Tooele City. I work for the City of Tooele as their Economic Development Director and Grant Administrator. And grants, right? I've been able to pull in a lot of grants for historic preservation. We've, in my time there, reactivated our Historic Preservation Commission. We've joined the Utah Main Street program. We were the first of just 7 communities that were in the top tier of the Utah Main Street program in the state, and so that's been a really rewarding experience to kind of engage there and work on economic development, but also historic preservation, and really it's been a pleasure working with the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office staff as well, to learn from them and work on grants for historic preservation. I don't have an architecture background, right? But I do have a strong interest in learning some of those terms and you know, really getting into the. I mean, the city has great design standards already that we can kind of follow and look into that. But yeah, I think that's kind of my interest. I'm excited to be part of this group and interested in contributing.
Thank you, Jared. Council members?
I'm just gonna say, wow, that is really cool, Jared. So thank you so much for also serving here. I love your building, and I'm also impressed at, you know, the work that Tooele, like you're doing for Tooele. I was an intern at some point, and I was doing something at the county, but for Magna, so it's kind of like far away, and it's very different than what we see downtown. So
it actually does have a really cool Main Street.
Yeah. And so anyway, thank you. I appreciate your time. We need you.
Thank you. You'll be on our consent agenda tonight.
Wonderful.
Appreciate
Thank you, Council.
everyone's, and it feels like everyone was like really well qualified for these appointments today. Not that we ever appoint someone that's underqualified, but it just seems like very well qualified people. So thank you so much for being willing to give your expertise to our community.
And it's well known that the HLC is the coolest commission in the city.
Planning Commission's pretty good too. All right. Report of chair and vice chair. I have no report. Announcements? Do we have any announcements? No announcements today. There is a closed session, I believe, for litigation. Pending litigation advice at council. So I'll be looking for a motion to enter closed session for those two purposes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a motion from Councilmember Petro, second from Councilmember Valdemoros. Is that okay that way? Okay, I do need a roll call this. So Councilmember Young?
Aye.
Pui?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Petro?
Yes.
Valdemoros? Dugan?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That passes 7-0. We are entering closed session. Our work session will be adjourned, and we will be back for formal session at 7 p.m. tonight, back in this room.